Chapter 1442. Just as the Emperor's terrifying pressure was about to land on the Martial Emperor, the Martial Emperor smiled faintly and raised his hand to point at the talisman formed by the Jade Mountain. Watermark advertisement, test watermark advertisement, test in an instant. The talisman trembled slightly. Then, the Emperor's power from the Emperor's Jade Seal instantly broke free from the Emperor's control. As it flowed, it changed, and it was all connected to the talisman. Under such circumstances, how could the Imperial Jade Seal still condense a terrifying power to attack a martial emperor like it did before? Immediately, the Jade Seal returned to its original appearance, and the extremely powerful, terrifying, and shocking Emperor's power that lingered around the Jade Seal instantly transformed into a palm purely made of Emperor's power in midair. With a slight grab, it grabbed the Emperor in its hand. The Emperor felt as if he had fallen into a dream. Everything that was happening in front of him was beyond his understanding. The Emperor's power that he had condensed was completely the Emperor's power that he had worked hard to obtain over the past few days. Why did it break free from his control with a single talisman from his opponent? It directly reversed its form and was actually being controlled by his opponent to deal with him. This kind of thing, no matter when, even in the most ridiculous of fantasies, he had never thought of it. The Martial Emperor looked at the Emperor and sighed. The smile on his face had completely disappeared. The reason why he was able to do all these things that seemed to completely exceed the Emperor's understanding was because of the Jade Talisman that the Southern Reverend had given him. It was precisely because of his comprehension of the Jade Talisman that he had completely grasped the Tao contained within the Jade Talisman and the mysteries of the Grand Tao that he was able to do this at a time like this. The Emperor's reliance on the Emperor's power was also the key reason why he was able to do this. It was also the key reason why he was able to do this. From this point of view, if he hadn't done as Luo Fan had said and comprehended the mysteries contained within the Jade Talisman, and worked hard to absorb the mysteries within and make them his own, then if he met someone who could grasp the Jade Talisman now, that person's performance would probably be inferior to the Emperor's. At this moment, when he saw the Emperor's appearance, the Martial Emperor felt there was only that kind of sadness. How could there be any joy? Thus, after letting out a sigh, the Martial Emperor made a grabbing motion. The palm formed by the power of the Emperor retracted slightly and instantly entered the Jade Talisman, placing it together with the tens of millions of creatures that were originally suppressed in the Jade Talisman. The Emperor and the soldiers that he had abandoned before suffered the suppression of the Jade Talisman together. At the instant the Emperor was suppressed, the country formed by the many creatures that opposed the Martial Emperor on the island instantly became gloomy. All living creatures. For no reason at all, he felt an inexplicable sadness welling up in him. Even if they were getting married, even if they were holding their children for the first time, even if they just happened to fulfill their wishes, they would still be able to do so. They all felt the same sadness. At this moment, almost everyone understood that their emperor, the one who bore all their hopes, had already failed. This knowledge caused countless living beings to burst into tears. The entire island was enveloped in an inexplicable cry. This change was equally obvious to everyone on the island. It was also very obvious to the armies from the other islands that were attacking from the other islands. These attacking troops were originally advancing extremely smoothly and quickly on this island. But when they suddenly encountered such a change at this moment, all of them were slightly bewildered. How could they not know about the internal strife on the island when they attacked? How could they not know that as the owner of the island, the Martial Emperor, he was in imminent danger during the attack? Even if news of his death spread the next day, they wouldn't be surprised. However, under such circumstances, the Emperor, who had the absolute upper hand against the Emperor, died all of a sudden. What exactly happened during this period of time? Was the Martial Emperor really so powerful that the opposing Emperor couldn't defeat him, even though he had such a powerful force? For a moment, the troops on the dozen islands slowed down their advance, planning to wait and see what would happen when the others encountered the Martial Emperor. Everyone had the same thought. It was easy to imagine what the final situation would be like. After a few months, their speed became slower and slower. In the end, they finally stopped at the center of the island, where the martial emperor's palace was located. They formed a circle from all directions, but they didn't dare to advance any further. Although they were the expeditionary troops, they weren't the emperor of the island. The emperor of the island was in the center, and unless it was to reap the harvest at the last moment, why would he step on as someone else's island? Since they weren't the owner of the island, and they weren't the emperor, their strength was obviously much weaker than their emperor. In fact, they were definitely weaker than the emperor who was suppressed by the martial emperor. Under such circumstances, they were naturally extremely fearful of the martial emperor, who could easily suppress the emperor. It was already very courageous of them to be able to approach this place without knowing the martial emperor's strength. The world in front is already very different from the outside world. I think it must be the place where the imperial emperor has the most control. If we just step in like this, the situation will be irreversible, and we will definitely have to bear the imperial emperor's relentless attack. It's better to let someone else take the risk. This was the thought of the commanders of the expeditionary troops on the dozen islands. Everyone had the same thought, and they were all waiting for someone else to be the first to step into that area and challenge the martial emperor. It was certain that they wouldn't be able to advance. As for the dozen islands, it was even more impossible for them to come to an agreement. Among these dozen islands, any two islands were enemies, and they were all opponents. The reason why they could barely maintain the peace and ignore each other was because of the powerful pressure from the martial emperor. Furthermore, they could all be considered rational. It was all due to their restraint. How was it possible for them to put aside their original hostility and work together? They weren't people from the secular world. Who among them wasn't someone with extraordinary wisdom and foresight? Who didn't know that the other party would scheme against them? Who didn't know that the other party would set up all sorts of schemes? This kind of cooperation, how could they possibly come to an agreement? In any case, a large part of the island had already been occupied by them. This was barely enough to report to them. Maintaining the current situation was also beneficial to them. Therefore, they had a tacit understanding to maintain the current situation. The martial emperor soon discovered that the troops on the dozen islands had settled down. They began to digest the land that they had previously occupied, and an indescribable expression appeared on their faces. I didn't expect to stop there. The place where they stopped was none other than the area where the emperor's monarch's power was spreading out. The monarch's power was actually a kind of power that was condensed from the power of all living beings. As long as the emperor was recognized by all living beings, the monarch's power would naturally gather around the emperor, allowing him to obtain unimaginable power. Therefore, even if the emperor was suppressed by the martial emperor and was unable to absorb the monarch's power, because the country that opposed the martial emperor still existed. Therefore, the monarch's power still existed. However, because the emperor's power was no longer condensed, the monarch's power was scattered, spreading out in a certain space. This caused the monarch's power to spread out in the area where the martial emperor was, and also caused the troops on the dozen islands to misunderstand that the monarch's power was a warning from the martial emperor. As a result, they stopped outside the line, maintaining a situation where they surrounded the center of the island. Since they didn't come, the martial emperor gave up on the idea of making things difficult for them. Instead, he continued to cultivate in his imperial palace. Without the help of the monarch's power, it was much more difficult for him to cultivate than before. But at the same time, because he was no longer under the influence of the monarch's power, any gains he made were extremely stable and extremely valuable. Bit by bit, they were used on the foundations of his cultivation, allowing his cultivation to increase steadily. The martial emperor was inferior to Luo Fan and Air Maiden. He didn't have the time to cultivate in seclusion for a long time to sort out his worldview like the two of them. Instead, he cultivated bit by bit to form his own unique worldview according to his own cultivation. And as his cultivation increased, it became more complete. Under such circumstances, his current worldview of martial arts was not even as complete as Air Maiden's. This imperfection and incompleteness made it difficult for him to see the essence of his cultivation, and the influence he received from the demon realm's cultivation system was even greater. Now, he had almost forgotten about his worldview of martial arts, and only focused on cultivating according to the demon realm's cultivation system. As a result, at this moment, the most important thing for a martial emperor was to perfect his understanding of the world of martial arts. However, he only managed to expand his understanding of the world of martial arts when he occasionally made some progress in his cultivation. Time passed year by year. For pseudo-saint realm cultivators, let alone a few years, even millions or tens of millions of years would pass. It was just an ordinary period of time. And this fact created a situation. Once they decided on something, once the situation they wanted to maintain took shape, then it would take an extremely long time or a huge change before it could be changed. Hence, in the next few hundred years, the island remained in such a state. While the Martial Emperor's island was in a stalemate, Luo Fan and the Nanzun were still having a cultivation discussion in the Nanzun's cave abode. This sort of Tao discussion was an extremely deep and direct Tao discussion. This kind of cultivation discussion was determined by the cultivation path of both parties, but the duration was different. For the elders, hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years of cultivation discussion were not considered short. For those who were shorter, the outcome would be decided in a few days. As for Luo Fan and the Nanzun, there was a huge gap in their cultivation realms. However, there was not a huge gap in their cultivation realms. As a result, the cultivation discussion between the two of them went in a long direction. At this moment, although they had been having a cultivation discussion for hundreds of years, the situation in the cave abode was not much different from hundreds of years ago. Among the auspicious clouds above the cave mansion, the gray auspicious cloud above Luo Fan's head still occupied the absolute upper hand, forcing the blue auspicious cloud above Nanzun's head to occupy only a small part of it. However, compared to the past, there was not much of an increase. At this moment, both Luo Fan and the Nanzun, their eyes were closed and their auras were withdrawn, as if they had lost all signs of life. Only the auspicious clouds above their heads were constantly surging and changing. It showed the terrifying life force contained in their bodies. In the past few hundred years, Luo Fan had been comprehending the many mysteries of the Nanzun's cultivation path that he did not understand. As for the Nanzun, he was also comprehending the root of Luo Fan's cultivation path, searching for what the Lord had been searching for. However, back then, when Luo Fan's cloud was compressed to the size of a head, the Nanzun could not find the root of his cultivation path. Now Luo Fan's cloud had the upper hand. It occupied such a vast area, it was even more impossible for the Nanzun to find it. Even after hundreds of years, he had only obtained a lot of seemingly right, but actually wrong principles. He still felt that there was a huge gap between him and the root of Luo Fan's cultivation path. Compared to the Nanzun's powerlessness, Luo Fan was different. He had already comprehended the traces of the saint's path in the Nanzun's cultivation path hundreds of years ago. It was equivalent to comprehending the general outline of the Nanzun's cultivation path. Under such circumstances, if he were to comprehend the Southern Reverend's Tao of cultivation, it would be equivalent to comprehending the other auxiliary or specific changes according to the general principles. The difficulty was obviously far less than comprehending the traces of the saint's path. Therefore, he had gained quite a lot in the past hundreds of years. Almost all the time, he could feel that his cultivation realm was improving. He could feel that his strength was growing in the process. And he could also feel that his understanding of the way of the sage was deepening. On this day, Luo Fan felt a burst of clarity in his mind. Suddenly, the auspicious cloud above his head surged and changed. Suddenly, its power greatly increased, instantly breaking the balance process that had lasted for hundreds of years. It broke through the defense of the Southern Lord's auspicious cloud and directly rushed in. It quickly infected and assimilated the blue auspicious cloud above the Southern Lord's head. In the blink of an eye, it quickly turned into a dusky appearance. Such a change was like a bolt from the blue to the Nanzun. Although he did not care about winning or losing, And although he knew it would be difficult for him to win the sparring session, it did not mean that the Nanzun would not be moved in the face of such a huge gap. At this moment, an indescribable shame engulfed him. This kind of shame was something he had never felt before in his life. As a disciple of the Saint Supreme Priest She, the Nanzun had only one kind of emotion in his life, and that was confidence. It was a kind of extraordinary confidence that surpassed all living beings in the world, and there were not many people in the universe who could be compared to him. This kind of confidence made him so indifferent, so free and easy, and also made him like a hot knife through butter in his cultivation, constantly advancing and growing. But now, unknowingly, he actually felt this kind of shame that made him despise him in the past. Moreover, he felt ashamed for a cultivator whose identity, status, and even cultivation realm were far inferior to his. To him, this was as significant as splitting the heavens and the earth. Amidst this shame, Nanzun suddenly felt that his mind had become extremely clear. In the past few hundred years of hard work, he had only been one level away. What he had been looking for, the root of Luo Fan's cultivation, suddenly appeared directly in his heart. This way of appearing was extremely mysterious. It was almost as if it had been placed in front of him since a long time ago, but he only suddenly noticed its existence now. This feeling of searching for her thousands of times in my dreams, but when I look back at dusk, she's actually in the dim light, made the Nanzun suddenly feel an indescribable sense of relief and an indescribable joy. The Nanzun opened his eyes and raised his head to look at the auspicious clouds above his head. He thought to himself, I didn't expect that I could not find her no matter how hard I looked, and in the end, I actually found the root in the shame. In a situation where he thought that he had obtained a great harvest, even if the auspicious clouds were completely corroded and assimilated, he would not feel frustrated anymore. On the contrary, he was secretly laughing in his heart. He was secretly laughing at the fact that Luo Fan had gained a sesame seed and lost a watermelon. He had obtained a little false reputation, but instead, he had revealed the root of his cultivation. The speed of the auspicious cloud's transformation was extremely fast, but after a short while, the transformation was already complete. The blue auspicious clouds above the Nanzun's head had completely transformed into the gray color of the auspicious clouds above Luo Fan's head. In the entire cave, only the gray auspicious clouds above his head occupied the upper part of the cave abode. On the contrary, it gave off a feeling that it was more like his cave abode. When the last bit of the auspicious clouds belonging to the Nanzun was completely corroded and assimilated, Luo Fan slowly withdrew his own auspicious clouds. They were like tired birds returning to their nests, constantly shrinking and tunneling back into the top of Luo Fan's head. Not long after, they disappeared without a trace. Then Luo Fan opened his eyes and let out a long sigh. The Nanzun asked at this moment, I wonder how you were able to corrode and assimilate my Tao so easily in the end? The auspicious clouds were the materialization of a cultivator's Tao of cultivation. Corroding and assimilating the auspicious clouds was actually corroding and assimilating the opponent's Tao of cultivation. That was why the Nanzun said this at this moment. When Luo Fan heard this, he didn't hide it and smiled. It's nothing much. I just suddenly comprehended the true essence of your cultivation and realized that the Tao of water that you cultivate is an alternative Tao of space that uses space as water. That's why I gained something. Hearing this, the Nanzun's expression changed slightly. He didn't expect Luo Fan to see through his cultivation. One must know that the Tao that he cultivated didn't seem to have any inclination on the surface. But if someone could comprehend it carefully, they would realize that this seemingly unbiased Tao of cultivation was actually inclined towards the Tao of water. However, although the Tao of water was already unimaginably mysterious, as a level 9 pseudo-saint and a disciple of a sage, how could the Nanzun cultivate an ordinary Tao of water? Therefore, the Tao that the Southern Reverend cultivated was a macroscopic Tao of water that used space as water. Other than him, and those who were well aware of Taoist Shui's power, no other cultivator had truly seen through it. But now, in just a few hundred years of discussion, his essence had actually been seen through by this level 7 pseudo-saint in front of him. Moreover, the other party even integrated this understanding into his own Tao of cultivation. Yes, the Nanzun's Tao of cultivation could actually produce a crushing advantage over him and quickly assimilate and erode his Tao of cultivation. How ferocious and how terrifying this was. Luo Fan had said it in an understated manner, as if this matter wasn't difficult, as if it was very easy for him to comprehend the root of his Tao of cultivation and completely engulf his Tao of cultivation. In fact, if he didn't have an outstanding comprehension ability, and if he didn't have a deep understanding of his Tao of cultivation, or even his own Tao, it was absolutely impossible. With a slight change of expression, the Nanzun suddenly regretted asking Luo Fan just now. This was completely making himself suffer. Seeing that the Nanzun's expression changed slightly and seemed to become more and more unsightly, Luo Fan smiled and asked, "I see that you've also comprehended quite a bit. I wonder what you've gained?" Speaking of this, the Nanzun's expression became much better. However, he suddenly remembered what he had comprehended. In comparison, it didn't seem to be a big deal for Luo Fan to comprehend the foundation of his Tao of cultivation so easily. Therefore, the Nanzun only smiled and said, "I've also comprehended some things. However, I've only comprehended that your Tao of cultivation is to turn the body and mind into the foundation, which is far inferior to yours." Hearing this, Luo Fan's expression didn't change, but he sighed inwardly. As expected, the importance of one's own worldview was once again reflected. Who would have thought that the two cultivators, who were countless times more powerful than the average 9th grade holy sage, would actually be able to comprehend a simple fact that was originally very easy to comprehend, but it was completely different from what they had expected. Chapter 1443. Luo Fan smiled. He did not comment on it, nor did he show any serious expression. One had to know that it was up to Luo Fan to decide what the Southern Lord was comprehending and whether it was correct or wrong, as long as Luo Fan did not say anything to confirm it. However, once Luo Fan spoke, the situation would be completely different. If he comprehended wrongly and Luo Fan confirmed it, wouldn't Luo Fan be lying to him on purpose? It would be fine if he did not reveal it, but if he did, wouldn't they fight to the death in the future? Therefore, Luo Fan's best choice was to pretend that nothing had happened and not comment on the Southern Lord's comprehension. The Southern Lord was obviously not looking forward to hearing Luo Fan's answer. He smiled and said, "What do you plan to do, fellow cultivator?" A normal discussion naturally did not have the rule of the winner making requests. However, the situation was different for the Southern Lord and Luo Fan. Although they didn't say it out loud, they both knew what the other wanted. They knew what the discussion was about. Since the result was out and Luo Fan had won, it was naturally Luo Fan who would make requests. Luo Fan was not surprised. He said calmly, "I'll take the Martial Emperor with me. What do you think? Is this enough? Why don't you think about it again? There might be more valuable things you can do," the Southern Lord said with a smile. "There's no need for that. This is enough." Luo Fan smiled. The Southern Lord nodded and did not say anything else. He raised his hand and grabbed at the void. In an instant, the Luck Path River appeared. Then, two of the Luck Path worlds underwent subtle changes. The two Luck Path worlds were the Southern Lord's Luck Path world and the Martial Emperor's Luck Path world. When they first appeared, Luo Fan could clearly see an extremely strange connection between the two Luck Path worlds. The connection seemed to suppress and rely on each other. However, as the Nanzun raised his hand and grabbed, the connection between the two luck realms weakened significantly. In the blink of an eye, it became a normal connection between two luck Tao worlds. It was no longer possible to tell just how close the relationship between them was. Seeing this scene, Luo Fan smiled with satisfaction. The changes in the two luck realms were the result of the Southern Reverend severing his connection with the Martial Emperor. From now on, the Martial Emperor was no longer under the Southern Reverend's tutelage. He was also not a disciple of Taoist Deshui. His luck, he would no longer be affected by the Southern Reverend. It was the connection that the South Reverend wanted to re-establish. He would need a martial emperor to become his disciple again. His own wish to be alone was no longer of any use. When the connection between the Luck world suddenly weakened, the martial monarch on the island instantly felt an indescribable change. This inexplicable change could not be described with words at all. What exactly did it change? However, he could clearly feel that when the change occurred, his body and mind suddenly became relaxed. In a trance, he seemed to have broken free of countless shackles and suddenly obtained the greatest freedom. Facing such a change, the martial monarch felt an indescribable joy in his heart. In an instant, he understood that he was truly free. He no longer needed to stay on the island, nor did he need to be controlled by the Southern Reverend and his disciple. It was easy to imagine how strong the joy in his heart was when he discovered this. In his joy, he could not control himself and suddenly let out a long roar towards the sky. The long roar soared into the sky and spread out in all directions like a surging wave. The range of the roar was not limited by the rules of sound at all. As if there was no limit, the range of the roar became wider and wider. In the end, it enveloped the entire boundless island. Every living creature on the island, whether it was the native creatures on the island or the invading armies from the other islands, all heard the roar that was filled with endless joy and ease. For a time, an inexplicable panic gradually emerged in the entire island, and the illness began to become more and more intense, more and more obvious. After all, no matter who it was on the island, whether it was the native creatures on the island or the invading armies from the other islands, they were all enemies of the martial monarch. Under these circumstances, anything that was of great benefit to a martial monarch, no matter what it was, would be an extremely bad thing for them. More importantly, no matter how one looked at it, the martial monarch looked like he had greatly increased his cultivation realm. To them, a great increase in cultivation realm was the worst of the worst, the worst of the worst. It was no wonder they were so panicked. At this point, the leaders of the dozen or so islands, who had been in a stalemate for hundreds of years, finally knew that they could not wait any longer. They did not even need to communicate before they crossed the boundary that had obstructed them for hundreds of years. They truly stepped into the area enveloped by the martial monarch's power. The current martial monarch did not have the mind to care about them, nor did he control the martial monarch's power to attack them. As a result, after they crossed the boundary and entered the area enveloped by the martial monarch's power, nothing out of the ordinary happened. It was as if the martial monarch's power that enveloped this area did not exist at all. When they discovered this, the armies on the dozen or so islands became even more cautious and vigilant. There was no doubt about their confidence in being able to command an army of tens of millions of soldiers. If they hadn't truly believed that this boundary was extremely important and that passing through this boundary would directly clash with a martial emperor, directly causing them to suffer indescribable misfortune, how could they have possibly wasted hundreds of years to be in a deadlock here? It must be known that even to cultivators, hundreds of years was not a big deal, but it was still a period of time. If it could be resolved in a short period of time, why would they waste hundreds of years to do it? But now, when they clearly knew that something was bound to happen, nothing happened. For them, there was obviously only one possibility. That was the change had actually occurred, but they just could not feel it and could not discover it. With such a thought, if they still did not act cautiously and vigilantly, that would be courting death. The moment they crossed the boundary, the martial monarch sensed their arrival. When he sensed their arrival, an indescribable expression appeared on his face. With a thought, he took out the jade talisman that he had previously put away. Then, he pointed at the jade talisman. The jade talisman suddenly turned. It turned into a huge mountain. Then, tens of millions of soldiers continuously spat out from the mountain, as well as the commander of these tens of millions of soldiers, the level 5 pseudo-sage emperor. The emperor was originally being suppressed. Although he had a clear spiritual consciousness, he could not see, hear, or feel anything at all. All of a sudden, he found that his surroundings lit up. Then, all his senses returned. The The surrounding environment instantly changed from a dark and cold appearance to a warm, familiar world. At the same time, the endless power of the Emperor that had dispersed because of his disappearance seemed to have found its master, and also seemed to be drawn and absorbed by a black hole. It was thrown toward him crazily, and in the blink of an eye, it made his strength increase by 10 times. The moment the power of the Emperor found its home, the many living creatures on this island, who had lost their emperor for hundreds of years and felt that there was no guarantee for their safety, felt an inexplicable sense of security at this moment. For a moment, those newly born living creatures did not know what had happened underground. They only felt that some kind of change in this world that was extremely beneficial to them had occurred. As for those living creatures who had gotten used to this feeling hundreds of years ago, but had lost their emperor because of the changes that occurred hundreds of years ago, they instantly burst into tears. They felt that their hearts, which had been unsettled for a long time, had suddenly calmed down. They felt that the sense of security that they did not have before had suddenly reappeared. After all, this was the demon realm, where the cultivation environment was many times more wonderful than that of other worlds. Here, even an ordinary person could easily live for 100 or 200 years without a problem. As long as they practiced martial arts for a period of time, it was absolutely not difficult for them to live for hundreds of years. Moreover, on the islands next to the 4 central continents, cultivation was very popular, and there were countless cultivators who had lived for hundreds of years on the entire island. Therefore, there were definitely many living creatures who had sensed the inexplicable sense of security of having an emperor hundreds of years ago. In this way, in almost every area of the entire island, there were living creatures who were obviously quite powerful, but were crying bitterly, "Why did you let me go?" At this moment, the emperor did not let joy get to his head. He was very clear-headed and asked cautiously. The martial emperor chuckled and said, "I just wanted to see dogs fight each other." The instant the emperor absorbed the monarch's power, he already knew the current situation at the same time. He knew that the allied forces of the dozen or so islands on this island were attacking fiercely at this moment, and they were going to divide the entire island. At this moment, when the martial emperor said these words, he instantly understood what the martial emperor meant. The humiliation and anger in his heart naturally did not need to be described. If it was before, under such humiliation and anger, he would definitely attack without caring about anything and finish off the martial emperor. However, at this moment, after being easily suppressed by the martial emperor with a jade talisman for hundreds of years, he finally understood that even if he had obtained the acknowledgement of all living creatures on this island, the love and respect of all living creatures on this island, and the almost endless monarch's power, it was still insignificant compared to the imperial emperor before him. If the imperial emperor wanted to suppress him, it would still only take a single move. Knowing the huge gap between them, knowing that he would definitely not be able to win if he went up and would only be suppressed again, how could he still go up against the imperial emperor? Of course, there was also the reason behind the martial emperor's words. Although the emperor was guided by all sorts of karma and rhymes to stand against the martial emperor, but he was still a living creature on this island. After all, he still cared about this island. Naturally, he could not just watch as this island was divided up by the dozen or so islands. If he was sure that he could not waste too much time and energy to deal with the martial emperor, he would naturally not let go of this opportunity. However, at this moment where he had already determined the martial emperor's strength, the emperor naturally could not waste his time on him. Therefore, the emperor's expression changed for a long time. Finally, he clenched his teeth and said, "Wait until I've dealt with those armies. Then I'll fight with you." As he spoke, he led his troops. They pounced towards the armies of the dozen or so islands. Along the way, not only did he work hard to improve the combat power of the troops, but he also began to recruit soldiers everywhere he went, constantly increasing his bargaining chips to fight against the armies of the dozen or so islands. After a series of actions like this, when the troops came into contact with the armies of the dozen or so islands, the original number of troops on this island, it had already increased to more than 20 times the original number. Moreover, these newly added soldiers, because of hundreds of years of nurturing, were not any weaker than the original soldiers. Their combat power was no less than that of the original soldiers, and there were even many pseudo-saint powerhouses among them. Their overall strength was actually not much weaker than the armies of the dozen or so islands. For our home, for our families, kill. Following the emperor's furious roar, the emperor led his army and clashed with the army of the dozen islands. There is no need to mention the scale of the war involving billions of people and tens of billions of people. It could be said that there were tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people losing their lives in such a grand war at every moment. Among them, there was no lack of powerful pseudo-sage experts, and there were countless quasi-sage experts. This was the fiercest war that the dozen or so islands had encountered since they set foot on this island for hundreds of years, but did not frighten the armies of the dozen or so islands. On the contrary, the armies of the dozen or so islands all heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. The most frightening thing was not the danger. It was the unknown danger. Although the fierce resistance in front of them had caused them huge casualties, and the number of people dying in almost every moment was more than the number of people they had lost in the past hundreds of years. After all, the danger had emerged. After all, they already knew where the danger came from. They no longer needed to guard against other unknown dangers, and only needed to deal with the war in front of them. To them, this was obviously a much easier task. The Emperor Wu watched the fierce war from afar, but his expression did not change at all. Although the Emperor Wu was the emperor of this island before and cared about the creatures on this island so much. However, this did not change the fact that he was a powerful existence that could create worlds and creatures at any time. Therefore, to him, the many creatures on this island were just countless things that he could create with a wave of his hand. Under the situation where these creatures no longer treated him as an emperor, he naturally would not be affected by any emotions for them. After watching for a long time, his eyes revealed a look of boredom. This was because the situation of the battle had already become clear after only a short while. Although the combined power was not stronger than the combined power of the armies of the dozen or so islands. However, this power was only controlled by the emperor alone. This was a clear disadvantage for their opponents, the armies of the dozen or so islands. At the beginning of the battle, both sides were not familiar with each other, so the island side was naturally able to hold on. However, as they gradually became familiar with each other, and the armies of the dozen or so islands gradually discovered the essence of the emperor, the combined strength of the rulers of the dozen or so islands was naturally able to perfectly display it. Naturally, the emperor was exhausted and finally walked towards the end of his road. After being injured and forced to retreat, the emperor finally could not take it anymore. He could not help but speak to the martial emperor from afar. "You were once the emperor of this place. Help us." This voice pierced through the distant void and directly rang in the martial emperor's ears. Hearing this voice, the martial emperor's expression did not change in the slightest, and he only pretended not to hear it. "Help us. After all, this used to be your island. Could it be that you can only watch as it is divided up by the other islands, and the entire island is divided into pieces?" The emperor was still not discouraged. He continued to speak. When the martial emperor heard this, his expression still did not change. "Just what do you want before you are willing to help? If you resent us for opposing you and establishing a new country, I can abdicate right now and ask you to be the emperor again. Regain control of all the emperor's power, as long as you are willing to help." After dodging an attack, the emperor spoke even more urgently. When the martial emperor heard this, he was secretly amused. It had not been easy for him to cut off his connection with this island, and it had not been easy for him to get rid of the influence of the emperor's power on him. Under such circumstances, the emperor before him actually said that he would allow him to ascend the throne in exchange for his help. This was simply as absurd as exchanging trash that someone had just thrown away for treasures with that person. Amused, he casually waved his hand. In an instant, the heavens and the earth began to change, and a strange barrier was directly established between him and the emperor. This kind of barrier could not isolate anything else. However, it was extremely good at various methods of transmitting information, as long as this barrier existed, unless the Emperor possessed strength that surpassed his. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to transmit any information. Such a change naturally could not be hidden from the Emperor. In an instant, the Emperor felt as if he had been struck by lightning, and indescribable despair arose in his heart. In his opinion, allowing the martial emperor to ascend the throne again and returning all the emperor's power to the martial emperor was already the most precious reward he could pay. However, under the circumstances where he had already made an absolute promise, the martial emperor did not care about this at all and was actually dismissive of this benefit. This simply subverted his views and made him suddenly feel at a loss. He did not know whether the world was wrong or he was wrong. How could this be? Why would he refuse such a great benefit? With his strength, he clearly only needs to use a small trick to completely repel the armies on these islands. But why doesn't he do anything? The emperor thought to himself, but his face was as pale as a piece of paper. However, it was obviously impossible for him to have so much time to be in a daze and think about the reason behind this in the midst of a war. Soon, the battle began again. This time, without backup, the emperor, who had inexplicable despair in his heart, could no longer resist this round of attacks. In an instant, under the siege of more than a dozen powerful pseudo-sage experts, the emperor was directly shattered. His body, divine soul, and everything else were scattered in all directions, almost evenly spread over a large area of the island. The moment the emperor died, many living beings on the entire island, who had just gained a sense of security and stability not long ago, instantly felt a kind of indescribable grief, as if a piece of flesh had been forcefully dug out from their hearts. The more experienced beings instantly understood what was going on. For a time, the sound of crying spread over the entire island. The emperor himself was the support of the army. In the face of powerful opponents, it was precisely because the emperor, who was as powerful as the opponents, was restraining the troops, that these troops would not be crushed by absolute powerhouses. That was why these troops could be in a stalemate with the opponents who were as powerful as them. But now that the emperor was dead, this restraint had disappeared. In just a few days, the hundreds of millions of troops that belonged to this island were either killed, captured, killed, injured, fled, or surrendered. In the end, they all disappeared. After dealing with all the resisting troops, the dozen or so troops rapidly advanced. In less than a few days, they had all arrived around the martial emperor's palace. Just like the emperor back then, they firmly surrounded the palace. However, what was different from before was that these dozen-plus troops were extremely wary of each other at this moment. There was not even the slightest bit of trust between them. While threatening the martial emperor in the palace, they were constantly prepared to wipe out other opponents and guard against being attacked by other opponents. Now that all of your power has disappeared, quickly surrender and hand over the martial emperor's authority on this island. Since we're both pseudo-sages, we can let you go. This was the voice of the commander of an island's army. The martial emperor's authority that they wanted was the center of this island. To be continued. Chapter 1444. At the same time, the emperor's authority was also the hub where all the living beings on the island gathered the emperor's power. As long as one possessed the emperor's authority, they would be able to control all the emperor's power on the island, and they would no longer be rejected by the island. Then, they would truly conquer the island and become the true master of the island. However, the emperor's authority on each island was different, and it could be anything. Moreover, before it showed its power, it was not much different from other ordinary things. Even those at the pseudo-saint stage would find it hard to find it. Of course, this did not mean that if the conquered did not hand over the authority, they would never be able to conquer the island and obtain control over all the emperor's power on the island. However, if that was the case, they would have to go through the saint's test again, and they would have to work hard to obtain the recognition of the island and the living beings on the island again, putting aside the fact that it would be troublesome to obtain the recognition of the living beings on the island. It would be extremely difficult to pass the saint's test and join the saint service again. Therefore, The importance of the emperor's authority to the conqueror was beyond imagination. Hearing that person mention the emperor's authority, the expressions of the commanders of the armies on the dozen islands around the palace changed slightly. Everyone became even more wary of the armies on the surrounding islands. The emperor's authority could be said to be something that they could obtain by attacking the island. The final result: if someone else were to obtain the monarch's authority, then what awaited them might be failure that would cause all their efforts to be in vain. Now that there were so many competitors, how could they not be wary? Just as they said that the martial emperor in the palace could not be bothered to care about them. At this moment, the emperor's authority had been casually thrown to a corner of the palace. The emperor's authority of this island was a scepter that was about a meter long. It was a meter-long scepter that was as thick as a finger and made of unknown materials. To the forces on the other islands, the scepter was naturally extremely important, and it was something that they had worked hard for. However, to him, who had cut off all ties with the island, it was just an ordinary item. Why would he care? After waiting for a long time, the armies of the dozen or so islands outside finally ran out of patience. The commander of the other island's army let out a shout and said, "Imperial Emperor, since you want to see our power, we'll fulfill your wish." As he spoke, he waved his hand, and a terrifying force suddenly surged out from the army behind him, and it formed a figure in the sky. This figure looked like a great general. His body was tens of thousands of feet tall, and he looked very real. There seemed to be countless worlds within it that were intertwining with each other in an unbelievable way, complementing each other and increasing its power to an unbelievable level. After this general appeared, the surrounding space-time distorted slightly. It created a scene of bizarre luster. It seemed so mysterious and profound. According to the will of the commander of the army, it suddenly shook, raised its hand, clenched its fist, and then slammed it towards the imperial palace of the martial emperor. It was easy to imagine how big the fist of a 30,000 feet tall general was, although the martial emperor's imperial palace was huge and majestic. However, the main body of the imperial palace was only so big. Even if it was slightly bigger than the fist, there was still a limit. Under such circumstances, the palace where the martial emperor was located was instantly enveloped by the fist. With a loud bang, the fist instantly blasted a deep pit into the palace, a pit that went several hundred li deep into the ground. The ground shook. Everyone stared at the scene in front of them with their mouths agape. How is this possible? No matter how you look at it, this is an existence that can easily defeat an emperor. How could he be defeated so easily? That was the thought in everyone's mind. At this moment, the armies of the other islands that did not make a move began to wonder if they had missed out on something by not taking the opportunity to attack. At this moment, everyone's expression turned ugly. While everyone was still in disbelief, the 30,000 feet tall general hovering in the sky, the expression of the existence that was formed from the power of a large number of soldiers changed, and he uttered, "This is," at this moment, the general suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream. Then a terrifying and invisible power instantly swept through the 30,000 feet tall figure, instantly dispersing it completely. Everything about the figure was converted back into the unknown amount of power that had originally formed it. Then, the power swept back and directly charged into the army. Shrill screams interweaved together, forming a sound that made people's hearts tremble. Then explosions rang out continuously, and flesh and blood flew everywhere. The tens of millions of people in the army were instantly disintegrated by the power that rebounded back. Their bodies turned into tiny pieces that could not be picked up, and they all died, their souls dispersing. Such a horrifying change caused the hearts of the commanders of the dozen or so islands who had been wondering if they had missed out on the opportunity to instantly turn cold. An indescribable sense of relief welled up from the bottom of their hearts. I almost fell into this fate. The same thought appeared in the minds of almost every commander. At that moment, the commanders hurriedly led their troops back tens of thousands of kilometers. Although they did not disperse, they no longer dared to approach the Emperor Wu's palace. Apart from the commander of the army whose subordinates had all been turned into minced meat by the rebounding power, the commander of the army was still in a daze. At this moment, the commander of the army was still in a daze. He turned around to look at the large piece of flesh and blood behind him, as if he could not believe what he was seeing. After a while, he roared, "How dare you kill my people?" As he said this, the power around him became violent. The surrounding space-time was instantly shattered by his charge. Countless tiny space-time fragments condensed into an army flag. It waved in the air, crushing the surrounding space-time into pieces. It even directly communicated with the state of chaos. The terrifying power of the state of chaos directly surged down through the military flag. It was naturally not easy to directly guide the state of chaos, devour it, and guide it from outside the world into the world. Even the Saint Venerables, who were so powerful that they could make others despair, had spent trillions or even trillions of years to reach the end of 9 paths before they found a way. Although the commander of the army was also a false saint, there was still a world of difference between him and the Saint Venerables. It was clearly impossible for him to guide the state of chaos into the world. However, even though he couldn't completely guide the state of chaos in, he could easily break through the barrier between the world and the state of chaos by gathering all the power he had accumulated in his entire life and unleashing all of his understanding. He could directly use the power contained in the state of chaos. Terrifying, chaotic, violent, and completely uncontrollable power was drawn down. What he did at that moment that was exactly what he was doing. However, the power far exceeded the limits of what he could control. As soon as it charged down, it completely destroyed him, followed by everything within a radius of thousands of kilometers. This included time, space, and even even everything else. As the destruction took place, the martial emperor's figure materialized in the sky outside the range of the destruction. He looked at the terrifying destruction below and frowned. Fortunately, I was a little more cautious before. Otherwise, even if I don't die, I'll be heavily injured. Just now, when the commander of the army gathered the power of the soldiers to form the general to attack him, he was already prepared. The moment the attack descended, he had already used a martial art that could change space-time and transcend himself. Although it seemed like he was hit, he was actually hiding in a place that was completely unharmed. Afterwards, he directly sent the emperor's authority of the island to the fist's attack, allowing the fist to instantly shatter the authority. This triggered the emperor's power on the island, or rather, the backlash from the countless living beings on the island. The emperor's power, which only contained destruction, directly rushed into the giant general's body and completely destroyed it. Afterwards, it followed the power that formed the giant general and traced back to the source, directly destroying all the soldiers. When the commander of the army condensed the army flag and broke through the barrier between heaven and earth and the state of primal chaos, guiding the incomparably terrifying chaotic energy contained in the state of primal chaos down, he sensed that astonishing danger. He immediately escaped from where he was and appeared in a place where he could not sense any danger. Only then did he manage to avoid being crushed by the terrifying power of the state of chaos. Otherwise, even if he was much stronger than he was at the beginning, he would not have been able to escape from the terrifying power that surged out from the primal chaos state. If even the martial emperor was in such a state, the commanders of the army from the other islands felt a chill in their hearts. In fact, they even felt a faint sense of gratitude towards the martial emperor. If they had not retreated so far out of fear of the martial emperor, they would have been dragged into the abyss of hell by that suicidal attack just now and buried with him. "Let's retreat." The commander of the army on one of the islands gave the order. "Marshal, are we just going to leave like this? We've spent so much time on this island, and our goal is right in front of us. If we retreat just like this, I'm afraid it won't be good for the emperor," a tactician beside him said. As a tactician, he could naturally tell that the marshal's current order was different from when he led them to retreat. The order was different from the one that led them to retreat. Although he was very happy with this order, as a tactician, he had to ask this question. The marshal didn't care if the man was telling the truth, or if he was just following the procedure. He said in an indifferent tone, "I can sense that the Imperial Emperor's authority on this island has been destroyed. What we need to do next is not to find trouble with the Imperial Emperor, but to gather the authority of this island." With this reason, the tactician naturally did not need to insist. As such, the army of this island naturally retreated and began to return to the area they had occupied. They worked hard to obtain the acknowledgement of this island, the acknowledgement of all living beings on this island, in order to make preparations to gather the authority of this island and seize the fruits of victory from this island. How can an existence that could lead an army to occupy another island be stupid? This island was able to make such a correct response. Naturally, the other islands would not be too far behind. Soon, they also dispersed. Before they knew it, the place had become empty apart from the area that had been completely destroyed by the chaotic energy. There was nothing else in the area that had been turned into nothingness. The martial emperor frowned slightly when he saw all these reactions from the sky. After a while, he shook his head and waved his hand. In an instant, the area that had been destroyed by the chaotic energy reappeared with a group of buildings. The buildings were simple and powerful, but they no longer had the majesty and holiness of the imperial palace. Instead, it looked more like a martial arts arena. A martial arts arena. However, the martial monarch did not have the will to continue floating in midair. Since he didn't want to float in the air, the only thing he could do was to build another building. Just as the martial emperor was about to descend and settle down in one of the buildings below, a voice suddenly sounded in his ears. "It seems like the martial emperor has arrived. Brother Wu, you've had a lot of fun these years." Hearing this, a smile appeared on the martial emperor's face as he said, "It's all right. It's just that it's a bit boring without anyone to play with me." As he spoke, Luo Fan's figure appeared out of thin air not too far away from the martial emperor. He had already finished his discussion with the Southern Lord and had come to pick up the martial emperor. Luo Fan looked at martial emperor. "Brother Wu, what do you plan to do next? Why don't you leave and cultivate with me?" When the martial emperor heard that, he shook his head and said, "Next, I plan to take a look at this world. I've been in this world for millions of years, and I haven't even left this island." Luo Fan listened. He smiled and said, "That's fine too. The vastness of this world is beyond imagination. I've traveled the world over the years, and I've gained countless benefits." As he smiled, he suddenly said, "But I'm sure you have time to have a drink with me before you leave, right?" Brother Luo must be joking. When the martial emperor heard that, he smiled and invited Luo Fan to descend into a building that had just been built. After sitting down in an ancient and mysterious building, of course, it was impossible for them to directly serve drinks. Luo Fan and the martial emperor chatted casually in a relaxed manner. Luo Fan told the martial monarch about the various encounters he had in the past few years, starting from the encounter at the Azure Sky Temple until he participated in the Tao discussion spell assembly. Of course, this was only a rough description. As for what mysteries he had comprehended and what great benefits he had obtained, he did not mention it. It was not that he did not trust the martial emperor, but it was meaningless to talk about it. The martial emperor had already embarked on his own path. Even if he talked about it, it would be meaningless to the martial emperor. At most, it would increase his knowledge. Not only would the martial emperor not gain much from talking about it, it would even affect his cultivation and interfere with his train of thought. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the martial emperor was both envious and impressed. What he envied was that Luo Fan's life could be so wonderful. In just a few million years, he had experienced what ordinary cultivators couldn't experience in a few trillion years, or even tens of trillions of years. What he admired was that after experiencing so many things, not only was Luo Fan unharmed, but he had also obtained so many benefits, allowing his cultivation realm to rise to such a level. As Luo Fan recounted his experiences to the martial emperor also told Luo Fan about his understanding of the demon realm, as well as his experiences after becoming the Southern Lord's disciple. In this process, Luo Fan had unknowingly gained a general understanding of the situation on the four central continents. Dongsheng Divine Continent, Nanjan continent, Aparagodania continent, and Belu continent. These were the names of the 4 central continents of the demon realm. These were the names of the 4 continents that existed before Earth and the universe had shattered. They were also the names of the 4 continents that had been engraved into the life source of all living beings after countless eras. Finally, through various special methods, they had become the 4 names of various myths and legends. Now, the island that Luo Fan and the Martial Emperor were on was near the Dongsheng Divine Continent. From this island, one could see the vast and boundless land in the direction of the center of the demon realm. This was the Dongsheng Divine Continent. Previously, Luo Fan and the Southern Lord had gone to the Southern Lord's cave abode, a spiritual mountain, which was also in the Dongsheng Divine Continent. In the demon realm, there were 54 sages. All of them had a strange way of doing things. Each of them occupied a part of the 4 great continents. Among them, each continent was divided up by more than 10 sages. Every sage, in their own way, they occupied an area of varying sizes. The territory of the supreme sage, Priest Desui, was in a corner of the Dongsheng Divine Continent. Compared to the other sages, its area was not considered vast. It was only 3 million times the size of this island. Of course, such an area was not the lowest among the territories of all the sages. According to the Martial Emperor, among the 54 sages, the Karma Sage had the smallest territory. His territory was not in the Dongsheng Divine Continent, but in the Aparagodania Continent. The size of his territory was only 100,000 times the size of this island. It was the smallest among the 54 sages of the demon realm. As for the sage with the smallest territory, it was the Karma Sage. As for the sage with the largest territory among the sages of the demon realm, it was a sage called the Supreme Emperor Sage. The territory that he occupied was 30 million times the size of this island. Such an area was more than 10 times the size of Priest Deshui's territory. Even in the 4 great continents, it definitely occupied a very important part. It was equivalent to 1/3 of the North Continent. Of course, these were all territories in the 4 great continents. In the entire demon realm, every sage controlled an unknown number of vast sea regions. The islands on these sea regions were also considered their territories. Although the islands on these sea regions were sparse, because the sea regions were vast, the number of islands added up was also extremely shocking. The total area of these islands would probably far exceed the area of their territories on the 4 great continents. Listening to the Martial Emperor's explanation, Luo Fan had been in the demon realm for such a long time. He finally had a general understanding of the entire situation in the demon realm. For a moment, he could not help but feel a little complicated. Although he was a little shocked that the sages could divide the entire demon realm to such an extent, at the same time, there was an inexplicable sorrow in his heart. A supreme existence that was eternal, indestructible, and even capable of transcending the heavens and the earth to live freely in the state of chaos and split the heavens and the earth apart was actually like a feudal lord in the mortal world, occupying an area of the heavens and the earth and dividing it up. No matter from which angle one looked at it, it was obviously not something that could be envied by others. Suddenly, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat, and he asked, apart from these areas, there should be areas in the 4 great continents that the sages can't touch, right? His question was not without a target. Although the sages were omnipotent and seemed to be able to control almost everything, there were too many sages. Since each of them was omnipotent and omniscient, they restrained and hindered each other. As a result, each of them was no longer omniscient, and omnipotent. Since that was the case, then in the boundless 4 great continents, there were areas that could survive in the cracks between them and be able to obtain freedom because of the restraints between them. That was truly normal. Hearing this, the Martial Emperor said in admiration, "That's right. I didn't expect Brother Luo to think of it so quickly. When I first found out about it, I didn't even dare to believe this kind of judgment. I even specially looked through countless books before I finally believed that it was true. So it actually exists. As expected, where there are people, there's a martial world. Even the sages are no exception. Luo Fan sighed. However, the martial emperor did not pay much attention to it and said with a smile, "Isn't that very normal? Since there are battles between the sages and have to fight for territory, what's so strange about the so-called martial world?" Chapter 1445. The martial emperor said in confusion, "Actually, in these 4 continents, there are 18 places that are not under the control of the sages." Watermark advertisement test. Among the watermark advertisement test, there are 3 places on the Dongsheng Divine Continent. They are the Floating Mountain, the Eternal Abyss, and the Soulless Region. Each of the 3 regions had an area as large as 10,000 islands. It can be said to be vast and boundless. Countless cultivators who are unwilling to be restrained by the sages are hiding in these areas. When Luo Fan heard this, the look in his eyes was also somewhat inexplicable. He said, "The area of tens of thousands of islands is indeed quite vast. I didn't expect that in the base camp controlled by the sages, there would be such an area that is out of the control of the sages. Perhaps it is not out of the control of the sages, but under the control of more sages," the martial emperor said. Luo Fan sighed. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly frowned and felt something. The martial emperor's senses were not as sharp as Luo Fan's. After seeing Luo Fan's expression change slightly, it took him a while to react and feel what Luo Fan had felt. "This is a level 9 venerable." The martial emperor's expression changed slightly. Although he had heard that Luo Fan had interacted with many level 9 venerables in the past, the martial emperor had only really faced one level 9 venerable, the Southern Lord. At this moment, when he suddenly felt the means of a level 9 venerable, his expression naturally changed. Luo Fan frowned, nodded, and said, "I'm afraid so." Then, he stood up and took a light step. His figure instantly left the martial arts hall that the martial emperor had just built and appeared in a sea area outside the island. Behind him, the martial emperor also quickly passed through the void and came near him. "I wonder which fellow Taoist is looking for me." Luo Fan floated above the sea area. He asked calmly. At this moment, a figure appeared not far away from Luo Fan. This was a level 9 fake sage, that was for sure. However, he was not any level 9 fake sage that Luo Fan had seen before. Instead, he was a level 9 fake sage that Luo Fan had never seen before. At least, in Luo Fan's memory. He had never seen anyone who looked like this person, let alone a level 9 fake sage. After appearing, the level 9 fake sage smiled. "Fellow Taoist, how should I address you? Have we met before?" Luo Fan asked with a frown. "Fellow Taoist, how should I address you? Could it be that I've seen you before?" Luo Fan asked with a frown. The level 9 fake sage said, "Fellow sage Luo Zun is famous. I'm just a nobody. I know fellow Taoist, but fellow Taoist doesn't know me. This is very normal. I sage is king sage's master. I sage, but I am master sage. Luo Fan frowned even more. "Fellow Taoist, please tell me why you are here, lest we misunderstand." This kind of behavior was clearly not the behavior of an honest person. No matter how one looked at it, it seemed like there was a conspiracy. Sorry. I was a little excited to see a famous person, so I spoke incoherently. "I'm sorry, I'm so excited to see a famous person all of a sudden. That's why I spoke incoherently. I'm sorry, I'm a little excited to see a famous person, so I spoke incoherently. I believe fellow Taoist knows what I mean, right?" After hearing this, Luo Fan finally understood what was going on. Back then, the process of him and the holy venerable helping that heaven and earth to overcome the great tribulation of heaven and earth was completely unknown to the cultivators who participated in the Tao Discussion Conference. Of course, it was also unknown to the disciples of the holy venerable, like the book Venerable. Under such circumstances, it was as if they had entered the treasure seizing conference, and after an unknown period of time, the world suddenly changed. Everyone left the treasure seizing conference and appeared in the outside world, while Luo Fan and the sage disappeared at the same time. Putting himself in their shoes, Luo Fan felt that if he encountered such a thing, he he would definitely suspect that something had happened between him and the sage. He would feel that the sage might have been injured because of him, which was why he could not contact them. In this case, if they wanted to find the sage, they would naturally have to find him first. Moreover, he had disappeared for so many years. It was easy to imagine what they would think and what choice they would make. They would definitely cast a net around the world, trying their best to find him. The cultivator in front of him should be the one the book Venerable and the others had invited to find him. This is my oversight. May I know when fellow Taoist book Venerable will arrive? Luo Fan sighed. The level 9 pseudo-saint smiled. It won't be long before then. When I found you this time, I notified them. They should be on their way now. However, they're still quite a distance away from here, so it will take some time for them to arrive. So, with that, he shrugged his shoulders. Luo Fan said, I see. How should I address you? I am the Seal Venerable, and I cultivate in this sea region. Greetings, Luo Zun. The level 9 fake sage said. Luo Fan smiled and returned the greeting. Then, he introduced the martial monarch to the Seal Venerable. After another round of greeting, Luo Fan invited the Seal Venerable to the martial monarch's dojo on the island. I didn't expect Luo Zun to have property here. It is not easy to find an island near the 4 continents. The Seal Venerable looked at the island and said, Fellow Taoist misunderstood. This is not my property. It is Brother Wu's property. However, that was in the past, not now. Luo Fan smiled. Hearing this, the Seal Venerable's expression changed slightly, and he looked at Luo Fan with a solemn gaze. As a level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator who cultivated in the sea around the 4 major continents, he naturally knew how difficult it was to find an island around the 4 major continents to be his property, especially if he was not a level 9 pseudo-sage. There was only one way, and that was to become a disciple of a sage and become a sage's subordinate. Only in this way would one be able to control an island and become the master of this island. Judging from the martial monarch's appearance, as someone who was not a level 9 fake sage, he could only use this method to obtain the island. In fact, it was precisely because this was the only way that he said it would be extremely difficult for Luo Fan to find an island to be his property. As a level 9 fake sage, it was rare for him to change his mind. It was very rare for them to change their allegiance. Since they had not pledged allegiance to the sages in the past, the possibility of them pledging allegiance to the sages now was also very, very low. However, he was able to obtain such an island. That was simply the rule of breaking through the sage realm. No matter how one looked at it, it was not a simple thing. That was why he said such a thing. Previously, he thought that the island belonged to Luo Fan, and he felt that it was an incredible thing. He secretly admired Luo Fan's ability. Now, he suddenly found out that the island actually belonged to the martial monarch, and he had a deeper understanding of how powerful Luo Fan was. It should be known that saving a subordinate of a sage who controlled an island from a sage was not something that an ordinary level 9 fake sage could do. It was not even something that an ordinary venerable could do. However, Luo Fan was able to do this. Furthermore, he was only a pseudo-sage level 7 pseudo-sage, not a level 9 pseudo-sage. This obviously made his previous estimation of Luo Fan completely invalid. This made it clear to him that the Luo Fan in front of him was much stronger than he had imagined at his strongest. Facing Luo Fan, how could he not be serious? Sorry for not recognizing you. I didn't expect you to be able to do something that almost no one could do. It's really admirable. Venerable Een sighed and said. Luo Fan thought quickly and instantly knew what Venerable Een had guessed. He could not help but smile and said, The situation is not what you think. However, even though he said that, he didn't have the intention to explain the problem clearly. Luo Fan was just chatting with Venerable Een about the Tao. Occasionally, he would talk about the mysteries of cultivation and the mysteries of the great Tao, but made Venerable Yin's eyes light up. He felt that every word and action of Luo Fan contained unimaginable mysteries and extremely profound principles. Just this short conversation had already made him gain a lot, and he felt that the cultivation realm that he had been stuck in for who knows how many years had slightly loosened. Realizing this gain, Venerable Een was even more glad that he had accepted the request of Venerable Book and the others. In fact, he did not have much relationship with Venerable Book and the others, nor did he have much contact with Venerable Lord. He had only heard that there was a level 9 pseudo-sage existence in this world who was the closest to becoming a sage. At that time, he suddenly contacted Venerable Book and the others through a friend and received some compensation to help Venerable Book and the others pay attention to the appearance of Luo Fan in the sea area where he was cultivating. Once Luo Fan appeared, he would inform them. After that, he even felt that Venerable Book and the others were making a fuss over a minor issue. After all, as a level 9 pseudo-sage, studying the world was almost the most basic ability. Although his sensing of his own sea region was a little faster and more direct than the Book Supreme and the others who were far away, overall, there was not much difference at all. If he could sense it, they would definitely be able to sense it if they were not far away. However, seeing that the compensation given by Venerable Book and the others was really suitable, he agreed to this matter. But at this moment, he was extremely glad that he had agreed to this matter. He even felt that when he agreed to this matter, he must have had amazing luck, and the long river of luck must have been looking after him. If he had not agreed to this matter, if he had not agreed to help Venerable Book and the others monitor the sea area and look for Luo Fan, how could he have seen Luo Fan now? How could he have known that there was actually such an amazing person in this world? Could he find the opportunity to break through his cultivation realm? Previously, I heard that this person could win against Venerable Lord in a discussion of Tao. I thought they were exaggerating, but I didn't expect this person to have such a profound understanding of cultivation. Perhaps what they said was not false, and they have underestimated this person. Venerable Een had such a thought at this moment. Vaguely, he had already placed Luo Fan's status above that of Venerable Lord. Suddenly, he had an inexplicable feeling that if Venerable Lord could really have a discussion of Tao with Luo Fan in front of him, then it would not be an undeserved reputation. Of course, the interactions between level 9 pseudo-sages were reciprocal. Since Luo Fan had given Venerable Een such a great reward, Venerable Een had to reciprocate. Although Lord Een believed that he was far inferior to Luo Fan and was able to gain some benefit from Luo Fan's every move, word, and action. But in fact, he was able to gain a foothold in the sea area around the 4 continents and become a level 9 pseudo-sage that was recognized by the sages. How could Venerable Een be mediocre? Although he could not compare to Luo Fan in some aspects. But in other aspects, his achievements were not comparable to Luo Fan's. Needless to say, he was good at those aspects. It could be seen from his name alone, Venerable Een. What Venerable Een was good at? Of course, it was a seal. However, his seal was completely different from the seals of ordinary cultivators. Ordinary cultivators usually used hand seals, or seals. Seals like heart seals. But Venerable Een had already excavated the mysteries of seals to the extreme. His seal was a world seal. All of the seals he unleashed were formed from the condensation of countless worlds. They contained endless mysteries, endless principles, and infinite power. Such a seal, any one of them would be enough to form a multiverse. If any of them were released, a level 9 pseudo-sage could be killed if they were not careful. Their souls would be destroyed. The level 9 pseudo-sage treasure that he refined was also a seal. It was a magic treasure that had deduced the mysteries of seals to the extreme and integrated all of his understanding of seals into it. Because he had gained a lot from Luo Fan and felt that his cultivation realm had improved, Venerable Een returned the favor by showing Luo Fan the seal Tao that he cultivated. Among them, there were many profound experiences, which made Luo Fan feel like his horizons had been broadened. But only now did he realize that the world of seals could reach such a level and have such incredible mysteries. For a time, he understood something in his heart. Sure enough, every level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator is no pushover. If it wasn't for the fact that the worldview of the Earth's universe had already been deeply ingrained in the Tao of cultivation, it wouldn't have been possible. With his understanding of seals, perhaps he has already formed a worldview of seals. While admiring the Supreme Seal's understanding of seals, Luo Fan also felt a little regretful. However, of course, this was just a pity. Now that he had realized the importance of his worldview, he would never easily reveal it to others. As for the martial monarch, it was the same. Previously, in the Age of Chaos, who knew how many millions of years later, when he heard Luo Fan preaching to him about the meaning of existence that completely belonged to his own worldview, he felt that his horizons had been broadened. He found that the fog that had been covering him had suddenly dispersed. Although he was grateful to Luo Fan, he did not regard it as a great favor. However, after he entered the demon realm and became the disciple of the Southern Lord, he finally realized how precious the thing that Luo Fan had given him was when he truly understood the cultivation of the demon realm. Only then did he understand how much Luo Fan had done for him. Under such circumstances, he had even made up his mind that no one would be able to obtain any information about the meaning of his worldview from him. As for the current Lord of Seal, he had only just met him, so he naturally wouldn't have the thought of revealing this information to anyone else. Naturally, he didn't need to worry about him. When the Supreme Seal was preaching about his path of cultivation, he did not avoid the martial monarch, which allowed the martial monarch to gain greater benefits than the two of them. After all, the martial monarch was only a level 5 pseudo-sage. Although he had sorted out his own unique worldview of martial arts and was dozens or even hundreds of times stronger than ordinary level 5 pseudo-sages, he was still a level 5 pseudo-sage after all. His comprehension of cultivation and the mysteries of the Great Tao were still limited to the realm of level 5 pseudo-sage. Compared to level 9 pseudo-sage, there was still a huge gap. Under such circumstances, although the Supreme Seal did not completely preach the mysteries of his path of cultivation, just the small part of the content he revealed actually contained countless mysteries of the realm of level 5 pseudo-sage and above. As long as he could comprehend any of these profundities, it would be enough to form a huge boost to his cultivation realm. At this moment, listening to the Een Lord's lecture, the feeling was as if he was listening to the great Tao being displayed in front of him. At this moment, he was overjoyed. His eyes were sometimes filled with joy as if he had comprehended something, and sometimes annoyance as if he had encountered trouble. With one look, one could tell that he was completely engrossed in it. Luo Fan was naturally happy to see him gain something. After knowing the close relationship between the martial monarch and Luo Fan, the Supreme Seal also intended to repay the benefits he had gained from Luo Fan. Therefore, he did not mind it at all. Instead, he preached more basic content of the Tao of Seals so that the martial monarch could hear it more clearly. He would also be able to obtain greater benefits. After realizing this, Luo Fan smiled at the Supreme Seal. He expressed his gratitude. Time gradually passed as they chatted and discussed the Tao. In the blink of an eye, several days passed. Among them, Wuqiang was originally just engrossed in it. In the end, he was able to say a few words and preach some of the mysteries of the Tao of martial arts. Martial arts were something that almost every cultivator had learned. The Supreme Seal was no exception. However, because there was a cultivation path that was more suitable for him, so almost all cultivators would only study martial arts when their cultivation realm was relatively low. Only then would they use it in battle. After their cultivation realm increased to a certain level, they would naturally start to abandon martial arts. They would start to wholeheartedly pursue a cultivation path that was more suitable for them. Yet now, what the martial emperor was preaching was something that he'd comprehended, and it was even a complete martial Tao that could compare to the Tao of cultivation of ordinary cultivators. This caused the Supreme Seal to be dumbfounded. He felt as though a wider world had opened up in front of him. He felt as though his soul was suddenly released. Countless thoughts, countless inspirations, and countless lights flashed in his heart. Suddenly, he felt as though the shackles in his heart had been released. The bottleneck that had shackled his cultivation realm for hundreds of millions of years suddenly seemed to have become countless times weaker. It was as though he could break this bottleneck with just a slight poke and push his cultivation realm to another level, achieving a crucial breakthrough. No wonder Luo Zun would become good friends with him. Although this person's cultivation realm is insufficient, as long as he has enough accumulation, he will definitely become the next Luo Zun. At this moment, the Supreme Seal only had this thought in his heart. I don't know if it's my misconception, but I realize that the cultivation paths of Taoist Luo Zun and Taoist Martial Monarch seem to have some similarities. This thought appeared in the Supreme Seal's heart. However, he did not dare to ask about it. Not only did he feel that this thought was a little ridiculous, but it was also because this obviously involved the secrets of their cultivation. Since the two of them did not say this until now, it meant that they were not willing to let him know about this possible or non-existent connection. As for the ridiculous thought, it was needless to say. Luo Fan cultivated the Tao fruit Tao, while the martial monarch cultivated the martial arts path. How could there be any similarities between the two? Just because the two of them were good friends, it was obviously quite ridiculous to think that their cultivation paths were similar. All these thoughts just flashed in the Supreme Seal's heart for a moment. Because he felt that the Book Monarch and the Martial Monarch would come at any time, he seized the opportunity to chat with them. However, he did not waste too much time and energy on these speculations and distracting thoughts. Because he had gained more from the Martial Monarch than from Luo Fan, he focused more on the communication with the Martial Monarch in the following exchanges. He compared the way of seals that he cultivated with the Martial Monarch's way of martial arts and fused them together. He searched for the place where the two of them combined. He searched for the other's way of cultivation that would be helpful to his own way of cultivation. He worked hard to absorb and fuse them together. This kind of initiative was a good thing for the Supreme Seal, even more so for the Martial Monarch. During this exchange, he felt that his heart was bursting with inspiration at every moment. He felt that his martial arts worldview was being perfected at an extremely fast speed. He felt that his martial arts path was being greatly expanded in this process because of the various mysteries of the Seal Tao. Chapter 1446. Of course, days like this could not go on forever. A few days after the Zun arrived, even the martial emperors could clearly feel a strong aura coming from afar. It shook the island's space-time and affected the island's rules and laws. They're here. As Luo Fan spoke, more than 10 level 9 pseudo-martial sages appeared above the island out of thin air. These level 9 pseudo-martial sages were familiar to Luo Fan. They were the disciples of the Book Emperor and the other Saint Masters, as well as Wu Zun's 9 confidants. Both the Zun and the martial emperors were slightly disappointed when they sensed their arrival. They sighed and turned to look at Luo Fan. Luo Fan smiled and stood up. He took a step forward and arrived in the void in the blink of an eye, arriving in front of the Book Emperor and the others. Luo Fan greets you, said Luo Fan as soon as he appeared in front of everyone. The Book Emperor and the others' expressions changed when they saw Luo Fan. Within it, there seemed to be anticipation, bewilderment, and even an indescribable and complicated hostility. Luo Fan had already expected their attitude, but at this time he didn't care. Greetings, fellow Taoist Luo Zun. Of course, etiquette was still necessary, so everyone greeted Luo Fan. At this moment, the Zun leaped across the void and appeared next to them. However, he did not greet the Book Emperor and the others. He merely nodded at them, turned around, and leaped across the void and disappeared in front of them. Everyone had expected the Zun to leave. However, no one was surprised. Immediately, Luo Fan said, I know you all have many questions, but this is not the place to talk. Why don't you all follow me to the cave residence of a good friend of mine and sit down? They had been looking for Luo Fan for so many years, so it was not a big deal to waste a little more time. Therefore, even though they were eager to learn about the Saint Masters from Luo Fan, they did not reject him. Immediately, they returned to the dojo set up by the Martial Emperor. This martial arts dojo was built by a Martial Emperor. For a level 5 pseudo-sage, It was an absolutely magical place. It was enough to shock any rank 5 pseudo-sage. But for a level 9 pseudo-sage, this was a little crude. After entering the cave residence, the eyes of the bookmaster and the others were filled with disapproval. However, this expression caused the martial monarch's impression of them to greatly decrease. Whether it was Luo Fan or Inzun, neither of them showed any unusual behavior after entering this place. Was it because they felt that this dojo was exquisite? These level 9 pseudo-sages were actually showing such expressions at a time like this. This clearly showed that they didn't approve of him. If there was no comparison, the martial emperor naturally wouldn't care too much about it. But with the comparison, how could he still stand it? As for the book supreme and the others, although he could see the change in the martial monarch's mood, he clearly didn't care. At this moment, all they could think about was what Luo Fan was about to tell them. It was about their master, the Holy Senior. Although everything else passed through their eyes, it didn't leave any trace in their hearts. My friend Luo Zun, you know what we are concerned about. What do you want to tell us? The bookmaster said calmly. However, Luo Fan instantly saw his nervousness and expectation from his eyes. You haven't received any news about the Holy Senior at all? Asked Luo Fan. In fact, this was nonsense. If they had received any news, why would they bother to look for him? To get the news about the Holy Senior from him? However, a guess was a guess after all. Without any confirmation, it was not appropriate to say anything else. Not at all. Since the day we participated in the treasure-seizing assembly, we haven't received any news about our master. The only thing we know is that you and our master disappeared at the same time, said the bookmaster. Luo Fan heard this. He couldn't help but nod and said, I see. It seems that the Holy Senior's matter is quite urgent, so he doesn't have the time to send any news to you. What's wrong with Master? The broken venerable asked in surprise. Although they were already level 9 pseudo-saints, the expressions of the disciples of the Holy Venerables changed slightly when they mentioned the Master who had raised them, taught them cultivation, and lived with them for trillions of years. Their expressions were filled with nervousness. Luo Fan said with a smile, My friend, you've misunderstood. Although something happened to the Holy Senior, it's just a problem of his cultivation. He didn't encounter any trouble. Hearing this, the crowd was slightly relieved, but they were still a little nervous. My friend, please tell us more about it. The bookmaster took a deep breath and said, Although Luo Fan didn't know why the Holy Senior didn't take the time to contact the bookmaster and the others, he didn't tell them to keep it a secret. Therefore, Luo Fan didn't hide it. He told them about all the things that the Holy Senior had done, except for those that were related to himself. Hearing this, the bookmaster and the others couldn't believe it. How could it be? Master never said that he had the ability to create a perfect world. The bookmaster murmured. Exactly. If that's the case, the power of us level 9 venerables can certainly bring a lot of help to Master. How could he not tell us? The broken venerable said. The others also expressed their disbelief. After all, what Luo Fan said was beyond their imagination. In the demon realm, even the sages of the demon realm could only survive in the demon realm. They even occupied various territories in the 4 continents, and there were all kinds of fights between them. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan told them that the Holy Senior was cultivating to create a world on the same level as the demon realm. Didn't this mean that the Holy Senior was more powerful than the sages they knew? Even if they thought that their master was powerful enough, and that his master was in the limitless world, even the most powerful being wouldn't dare to think like this. Therefore, they almost instinctively believed that Luo Fan was lying. When Luo Fan heard this, he just smiled and said, I have told you everything I know. If you don't believe me, then I can't do anything about it. Since you know where Master is, could you take us there to find him? The bookmaster smiled apologetically. Luo Fan shook his head and said, That place is a place of nothingness. There's no concept of time. There's no concept of space. When you leave and enter again, you'll be in a completely different place, unless someone guides you. Otherwise, it's impossible to enter the same place twice at the same time. Therefore, now, I can't take you there. I'm really sorry. Hearing this, everyone's face darkened. My friend, don't lie. You've been there before and left your aura there. Why can't you go there again? Wu Zun said. Although the others didn't speak, their expressions showed the same intention. Luo Fan couldn't help but frown and said, I didn't mean to go there again. Why would I leave my aura? Even if I was willing to leave my aura, the Holy Senior wouldn't allow it. It must have been removed by now. The bookmaster sighed and said, I wanted to have a good conversation with you. I didn't expect you to hide it. Luo Fan's face darkened. He had already told them what he knew, but they were still so aggressive and wanted him to do things that he couldn't do. This was too much. He couldn't face it calmly anymore. He stood up and said to the martial emperor not far away, Brother Wu, I want to spend more time with you, but now there are so many accidents. It seems that I have to leave first. The martial emperor was not a fool. He could clearly see what the current situation was like. However, although he could see this, he was only a level 5 pseudo-martial sage. Any one of these people could easily crush him to death. Under such circumstances, if he stayed, he would only be a burden to Luo Fan and distract Luo Fan from protecting him. Therefore, he could only sigh helplessly and said, I didn't expect that I would still be able to help you. Luo Fan laughed and said, What's there to help? I'm only an incarnation here. Even if I lose it, it won't hurt my real body. What happens next is just a game. The only thing that affects the outcome is my mood. Even if you're strong enough, I don't want you to fight. The martial emperor sighed and said no more. Luo Fan smiled and took a step forward. His figure instantly crossed the void and appeared in the starry sky of this world. He quietly floated in the darkness. After a short while, more than a dozen level 9 pseudo-martial sages appeared in front of him. This incarnation of yours must not have been easy to come by. If you lose it like this, it will be a great loss. I hope that you will cherish this incarnation and take us to the place of our master. The Booklord looked at Luo Fan and sighed. The Bookmaster and the others had no intention of stopping Luo Fan's arrangement for the Martial Emperor. Putting aside the fact that the Martial Emperor could become an emperor on an island close to the 4 great continents, it meant that his identity was not simple. It was very likely that they could not afford to offend him. The fact that he was a good friend of Luo Fan was enough to make them worry. They were forcing Luo Fan to fight with Luo Fan. Although this was not a small conflict, there was still room for negotiation. Moreover, they wanted Luo Fan to help them, not to destroy Luo Fan. Under such circumstances, if they fought with the Martial Emperor, the final result would not be what they wanted, no matter whether they won or lost. It's just an incarnation. I can afford to lose it. Luo Fan said lightly. Why do you have to do this? What we're asking you to do isn't something too difficult. As long as you take us to that place of nothingness, won't everything be resolved? Why do you want to waste such a rare incarnation? The remnant Venerable, who was the best friend of Luo Fan, tried to persuade him. I've said what I should say. Since you don't believe me, there's no need to talk nonsense. Let's fight first. Luo Fan shook his head. The remnant Venerable sighed and looked reluctant. At this moment, the level 9 pseudo-sage shouted, Sorry for offending you. As he spoke, his body swayed, and a giant axe appeared above his head. This axe was so powerful and tough that not even the space-time of the starry sky could withstand its existence. Even the layers of laws here seemed unable to bear the weight of this giant axe. A strange distortion was produced. Then, the giant axe swayed and fiercely chopped down at Luo Fan. With this chop, layers of worlds were born under the axe. At the same time, he frantically condensed an extremely strange power into the giant axe. This made the power of the huge axe increase without limit. Such an axe looked like the first axe that split the heavens and the earth. It felt like it belonged to the entire demon realm. The entire starry sky. All of them were going to collapse under this axe. Completely destroyed. Facing such an axe, Luo Fan's expression didn't change. The heavenly cauldron of the divine court appeared above his head. With a slight shake, a suppressive power surged in all directions and wrapped around the huge axe. The moment the huge axe was wrapped by this suppressive power, it suddenly stopped. The world in front of the axe, which was constantly being born and turning into various kinds of power, disappeared in an instant. The momentum of the axe gradually slowed down during this process. In the end, it even directly stopped in midair. The distance between it and Luo Fan was still a few dozen feet. The level 9 pseudo-sage's expression changed slightly. He spat out a mouthful of blood and directly merged with the huge axe. As a level 9 pseudo-saint, his blood contained boundless power and powerful will. When the blood fused with the giant axe, it instantly caused the axe to shake violently, directly dispersing the suppressive force that erupted from the heavenly cauldron of the divine court. This caused the axe to slash towards Luo Fan at an even faster speed. Luo Fan frowned. He raised his hand, and the heavenly cauldron turned. The mouth of the cauldron emitted an earth-shattering suction force towards the huge axe. The mouth of the cauldron madly sucked the huge axe into the mouth of the cauldron and threw it into the heavenly cauldron. The heavenly cauldron was a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure that had been infused with several holy wills. Its power was stronger than a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure. In addition, at this moment, Luo Fan was able to perfectly exert the power of the divine court heavenly cauldron. The power of the divine court heavenly cauldron instantly suppressed the level 9 pseudo-sage treasure and directly swallowed the axe. When the huge axe entered the cauldron, the level 9 pseudo-sage's face turned pale. In a trance, he felt that the connection between him and the treasure that he had refined for billions of years and himself was suddenly cut off. The feeling of the most important part of his life being taken away made him groan uncontrollably. Seeing that the situation had suddenly developed to this point, the Book Supreme and the others couldn't help but change their expressions. For a moment, everyone's eyes became dangerous. Originally, they had planned to go up one by one to teach Luo Fan a lesson. Even though they knew how powerful Luo Fan was, with his cultivation realm and the pride of a level 9 pseudo-sage, none of them thought that they would lose to Luo Fan if they went all out. In their opinion, as long as they were willing, it might be difficult to defeat Luo Fan, but they would definitely succeed in the end. However, after seeing the ferocity of Luo Fan's treasure, they finally understood that this person in front of them was worthy of being someone who could debate with their master and not be defeated. The power of his divine ability had really reached an unimaginable level. If they went up one by one, they would just be sending themselves to their deaths. At this moment, the Book Supreme made a decision. He said, "Fellow Taoist, be careful. Because fellow Taoist is too powerful, we have to attack at the same time." As he said this, an ordinary-looking thread-bound ancient book suddenly appeared above his head. This thread-bound ancient book flipped continuously above his head, and bursts of strange brilliance flickered on the ancient book. Then, more than a dozen pages suddenly separated from the ancient book and directly fell on the heads of the remnant venerable and the others, merging with the various treasures that suddenly appeared above their heads. As these pages fused with the magic treasures, the brilliance emitted by the dozen magic treasures instantly produced some kind of strange resonance. This resonance made these treasures seem to have become one, turning them into a treasure that was more powerful than anyone could imagine. It was so powerful that it didn't even look like a level 9 false sage treasure. Instead, it had become a higher level treasure. Facing such a change, Luo Fan couldn't help but be surprised. He didn't expect the Book Supreme's treasure to have such an effect. It could actually use itself as a medium to integrate the other treasures with completely different natures. It allowed the powers of the treasures to complement and promote each other, finally forming a power that was countless times stronger than the sum of their powers. How long has it been since I tried this? Luo Fan asked himself in his heart. Then he smiled and raised his hand to point at the heavenly cauldron. Instantly, the heavenly cauldron broke through the void that was locked by the treasure, directly opening a space-time tunnel that extended to an unknown place. His figure suddenly drilled into the tunnel. Then, He went into the tunnel. Although the power of that magic treasure was so powerful that even Luo Fan's divine court heavenly cauldron couldn't resist it, it had just been formed, and its power wasn't focused on sealing but in this aspect. Of course, it couldn't reach its limit. It had such power. For ordinary level 9 false sage treasures, it might be enough to render them helpless. However, for the heavenly cauldron, which had been infused with several holy wills, its power was astonishing. Although it was a difficult problem, it was no longer powerless to resist. That was why he could break through the seal of the treasure at this critical moment, break through the barrier of the starry sky, step into the space-time tunnel, and escape from the starry sky and the demon realm. The Book Supreme and the others were dumbfounded by Luo Fan's decisive choice. Escaped? As an expert who was suspected to have directly discussed the Tao with his own master and even had the upper hand, how could he flee without a fight when facing them? The development of this matter was so mysterious that they couldn't believe their eyes. Go after him. In the end, the Book Supreme was the first to react. He shouted, and the whole magic treasure formed by all the magic treasures shook slightly. Then, carrying all of them, it rushed into the space-time tunnel, chasing after Luo Fan. After passing through the tunnel, there was a vast thousand world. It was a relatively complete vast thousand world, with a complete civilization and all kinds of cultivators. The moment they entered this world, they knew that Luo Fan had left this world. Let's see how long he can escape. The Book Supreme gritted his teeth. Luo Fan left through another space-time tunnel, which led to the other side of this world. At this moment, the space-time tunnel appeared in the void of this world, almost becoming a wonder of this world. With the help of the treasure, the Book Supreme and the other's speed was quite fast. Almost in a split second, they passed through the space-time tunnel and entered another vast thousand world. However, this great thousand world was desolate. There was not even a living creature, let alone a human or a civilization. And in the other side of this world, there was another space-time tunnel. Above that tunnel, there were still remnants of Luo Fan's aura. Damn it, can't he just stop? Running away like this is not what a level 9 venerable should do. He doesn't care about his identity at all. This time, the one who spoke was not the Book Supreme, but the fake level 9 saint who attacked Luo Fan and caused his treasure to be suppressed by the divine court heavenly cauldron. Compared to the others, this person paid more attention to catching up with Luo Fan. His treasure was still with Luo Fan. At this time, the others did not say a word. They just tried their best to activate their treasures and increase their speed. They quickly passed through the tunnel and wanted to catch up with Luo Fan as soon as possible. Judging from the previous 2 worlds, if they could not catch up with him in a short time, he would really dare to open countless space-time tunnels, leading to countless worlds, and make them dizzy. After passing through the space-time tunnel, the scene in front of them almost confirmed their thoughts. There was another vast thousand world, and in this vast thousand world, there were 2 space-time tunnels. One was the one that they entered, and the other was the one that contained Luo Fan's aura. Obviously, Luo Fan had left. Everyone's energy was stimulated, and their bodies charged forward. They directly charged through the void and into the space-time tunnel, trying their best to chase after Luo Fan. 10 vast thousand worlds. 100 vast thousand worlds. 1,000 vast thousand worlds. Chapter 1447. Every time Luo Fan arrived at a world, he would instantly open a space-time channel to another world. His speed was unparalleled, and the target he chose was random. There was no pattern at all. Although this incarnation was just an incarnation and couldn't be compared to an avatar, it was still a part of him. If he couldn't avoid it, he wouldn't be stingy with this incarnation and would abandon it. But if he could escape, he wouldn't abandon this incarnation that he had painstakingly condensed and nurtured. In addition, this incarnation's purpose in coming to the demon realm had been accomplished. Since he had nothing to do in the following days, escaping from so many worlds was also a kind of cultivation. Therefore, he chose to escape at this time. It was also at this time that Luo Fan truly felt how large the number of worlds in the Earth's universe was. In just a few days, he had transferred more than 10 million great thousand worlds, but the worlds that he had randomly chosen were still not the same as the previous worlds. None of the worlds that he needed to pass through were the worlds that he had passed through before. There was only one possibility for such a situation. That was these 10 million worlds only occupied a very small part of the entire great thousand worlds. That was the only way for such a situation to occur. After discovering this, Luo Fan had some new ideas. How many of these worlds are there? Perhaps it's not a bad choice to explore. With this change in mentality, he opened the space-time channel more freely, and his speed also became faster. The traces that the Book Supreme and the others left behind actually decreased in the process. This unexpected gain made Luo Fan secretly happy. However, it made the Book Supreme and the others even more irritated. Originally, they didn't think that Luo Fan could run like this for long. After all, the world couldn't be infinite. There would always be an end, and Luo Fan would eventually return to the worlds that he had passed through. In that case, the senses that they left in those worlds would naturally be able to discover his existence, and they would naturally be able to come to those worlds in the shortest time possible. They would stop him. However, the development of things was beyond their expectations. The number of worlds was so great that it shocked them. There are actually so many worlds. Our world is just one of these endless worlds. Were we really frogs at the bottom of a well before? This thought became clearer and clearer in everyone's mind. In their eyes, their world was the vast and boundless demon world. They looked down on all the other worlds outside of the demon world. They felt that those worlds were like ants, no matter how many there were. They could easily destroy this world with a single thought. However, when they discovered that there were so many worlds, they were shocked. There were actually millions of worlds, but they only occupied an extremely small portion of these worlds. Their disdainful attitude gradually diminished. There were so many worlds with different strengths. Could it be that they were all weaker than their world? Among these worlds, was there really no world that was comparable to their world? Could their world really suppress this endless world? These thoughts caused by the terrifying number of worlds entangled them, making it impossible for them to think about the problem with their previous mentality. In a trance, they found that this chase no longer had the same meaning as before. It was as if it no longer had its original meaning. Instead, there seemed to be something else, something more. At this moment, they were horrified to find that their desire to catch up with Luo Fan was no longer as urgent as before. They actually somewhat looked forward to this process continuing for a long time. Time gradually passed as they chased and fled. In the demon world, on the island that Luo Fan and the others had left, the Martial Emperor had already decided to leave this island. Now, he had regained his identity. His relationship with Taoist Shui's disciples had been restored to its original state, which was completely unrelated to him. Under such circumstances, he no longer had any mission on this island. There was no longer any meaning for him to continue staying here. In addition, the cultivation environment on the island was still too poor for him. If he continued to stay here, perhaps it would be very safe, but the increase in his cultivation would become extremely slow. And this was clearly not something that the Martial Emperor, who had just been provoked by Luo Fan and the Book Supreme, was willing to do. Therefore, after Luo Fan and the others left, the Martial Emperor turned into a long rainbow, drew a long trail in the void, and headed for the nearby Dong Shang Divine Continent. There were 3 areas in the Dong Shang Divine Continent that the Sage forces did not control. There was almost no order in those areas, and experts were everywhere. It was an extremely dangerous place, but at the same time, it was a place with great opportunities. That was clearly the best place for the Martial Emperor to cultivate. Putting aside how exciting the Martial Emperor's cultivation in those areas, the living beings on the island had fallen into a state of celebration after the Martial Emperor and the others left. Just now, when more than a dozen level 9 pseudo-sages appeared here, the aura they emitted was so powerful that it almost caused the time and space on the island to freeze. It caused the laws and laws on the island to undergo a huge change, making them feel that the world they knew had changed completely. It made them feel like all their past cultivation achievements were no longer of any use. Under such circumstances, it was easy to imagine how uneasy they felt. As such, after the many-level 9 pseudo-sages and the martial emperor left, the relief they felt, the satisfaction of their strength returning, and the satisfaction of their strength suddenly returning were self-evident. They could not help but be happy about this. We can't stay on this island anymore. This thought appeared in the minds of the military commanders on the dozens of islands. An island with more than 10 level 9 pseudo-sages was obviously not an ordinary island. Obviously, it could not be an ordinary island, and it could not simply be an island controlled by a saint. There must be a deeper meaning to it. If they were to occupy such an island before they figured out what was going on, they would not be able to survive. At that time, if something were to happen, it would be something that they couldn't bear. Bearing the wrath of so many Class 9 pseudo-sages for such an ordinary island was clearly not something that a wise person would be willing to accept. However, despite having such thoughts, they did not withdraw their troops. It was just that the military commanders left the island and left their troops in their original positions, occupying their original territories and continuing what they were doing before. He worked hard to digest these territories and worked hard to gather the emperor's authority in these territories. Since the level 9 pseudo-sage cultivators wouldn't be able to stop them from doing this, it meant that it wouldn't be a problem for them to split up the island. Because of their choice, the island remained in its current state for a long time. However, it was rare for there to be a split around the 4 great continents. It was an island that was not unified and did not belong to any sage. It was also because of this situation that the island had unknowingly become the 19th area that was not controlled by the sages. Of course, most sages looked down on such an area, unlike the 18 areas on the 4 great continents that were not controlled by the sages. This was because the sages restrained each other. Even so, the situation on this island was different from the other islands. More and more cultivators who were unwilling to be shackled gradually gathered on this island, gradually turning it into a relatively independent world of cultivation. This was a kind of unexpected gain. On this day, Luo Fan, who was fleeing between many worlds, suddenly felt his body become heavy. Suddenly, he felt his body become heavy. He had fallen into a strange world. How could this be? This world. When he fell into this world, Luo Fan's expression changed, and he suddenly felt a sense of disbelief. There was actually an aura of a sage in this world. This was the aura of a sage. It was the aura of a sage that Luo Fan was completely unfamiliar with and had never sensed before. It was not the aura of the 7 real sages in the universe on Earth, nor was it the aura of the 54 demon sages in the demon realm. Instead, it was a brand new sage aura that Luo Fan had never seen or heard of before. This aura was extremely pure, eternal, and indestructible. It was omniscient, all-encompassing, and contained everything. Merely an aura like this had already caused Luo Fan to be extremely shocked, and it caused him to feel as if boundless profundities were contained within it. He felt that there were endless mysteries for him to explore. The moment he sensed this aura, he discovered that the world itself was special. The essence of this world was actually not the colossal world, but similar to the demon realm, a world between the colossal world and the perfect world. This entire world looked like a starry sky in the universe. In the boundless void of the universe, there were endless stars dotted with stars. These stars emitted a strong star essence that filled the void of the universe and permeated all the void and all the matter that Luo Fan sensed. The strength of this space was more stable than any of the colossal worlds that Luo Fan had ever sensed. The time here was also more stable than any of the colossal worlds that he had sensed. The great path of this world was also different from the great path of the demon realm, which was integrated with the rules and laws. Instead, it was like an ordinary world, an ordinary heaven and earth, hidden in the dark. The place where Luo Fan was standing at this time was a pitch-black void. The nearest star in this position was a star that was a few light years away from here. Coincidentally, there was actually a planet with life around that star. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He lifted his foot and took a step forward. His figure instantly traversed the void, traversed the distance of several light years, and directly arrived outside the planet with life. He floated on the surface of the planet and overlooked the surface of the planet. Although the rules and laws of this world were completely unfamiliar to Luo Fan, and the degree of complexity was similar to the rules and laws of the demon realm. If Luo Fan was still the same as when he first entered the demon realm, he definitely wouldn't be able to use the laws of this world so easily at this time, and it would be even more impossible for him to cross several light years in an instant to come here. However, the current him was clearly not the same as before. The current him, not only was he thousands of times stronger than before, but his understanding of the essence of cultivation was also unimaginable back then. For the current him, any changes in the rules and laws of the world were only superficial changes. As long as he was still in a perfect world like the Earth universe, as long as this world was still under the control of the great path of the Earth universe, and as long as the great path of the Earth universe was still a tributary of the great path of the Earth universe, there would be absolutely no obstacles for him to use it. In other words, the difference in the rules and laws of the world was no longer an obstacle for the current him to unleash his strength. No matter how advanced a world was, as long as it was still in the perfect world of the Earth universe, he would be able to unleash his strength perfectly. Therefore, at this time, he could directly traverse the distance of several light years and directly arrive outside this planet. He looked down at the planet. Luo Fan was secretly amazed. This planet was extremely massive. Its size alone was even larger than the sun that Luo Fan had seen before. Apart from its size, an extremely powerful cultivation civilization had been born on the surface of this planet. Luo Fan could even sense the presence of a pseudo-sage aura within it. Moreover, this was a false saint. However, it felt different from the pseudo-sage of the demon realm. Although it was not more powerful, its aura felt more rounded. Just as Luo Fan sensed this aura, a voice suddenly came from the planet. "Fellow Taoist, I wonder what brings you to my Kunlun planet." This was the voice of the fake saint. This pseudo-sage was only a level 3 pseudo-sage. His strength was originally much weaker than Luo Fan's. Even the cultivation realm that Luo Fan had displayed was the same. However, with such a gap in strength, he actually dared to question Luo Fan like this. This made Luo Fan secretly curious. His heart skipped a beat. His perception instantly allowed him to see the entire planet clearly, and everything was crystal clear. After seeing it clearly, he came to a sudden realization. He understood where the confidence of the level 3 pseudo-sage came from. It turned out that the source of this level 3 pseudo-sage was completely integrated with this star system, and it was even partially integrated with this universe. This integration allowed him to borrow a part of the power of this universe. With its support, this level 3 pseudo-sage could probably exert the power equivalent to that of a level 8 pseudo-sage. Of course, this was only on this planet. After leaving this planet, he would naturally return to his original form and could only exert the power of a level 3 pseudo-sage again. After understanding this confidence, Luo Fan secretly praised. He had never seen the ability to integrate with the planet and then use the planet to integrate with the universe, and then use the power of the universe to enhance himself. At least, he had never seen such a degree of use. While secretly deducing in his heart, Luo Fan said, "I'm Luo Fan. I accidentally entered this world and saw that there are living beings here, so I came to disturb you. I have no ill intentions." Hearing this, the level 3 pseudo-sage said, "So, it's fellow Taoist Luo Fan from the outer domain. I'm Young Shozi, greetings. Fellow Taoist is a guest from afar. Why don't you come to my cave abode and have a seat?" Hearing that Luo Fan was a guest from the outer domain, the level 3 pseudo-sage named Young Shozi was very interested and immediately invited Luo Fan to be a guest. As he said that, a young man in a long robe slowly appeared in front of Luo Fan. This person had an ordinary figure and an ordinary appearance, but there was indescribable vicissitudes in his eyes, which contained inexplicable wisdom. This was also why Luo Fan had such preferential treatment. If Luo Fan was a native of this world and suddenly appeared outside this planet, that person would definitely chase him away even if he did not attack directly. According to the customs of this world, this area was actually Yong Shozi's territory. If other pseudo-sages entered this place without notifying him, it would be considered an invasion. At that time, he could directly use the power of this region of the universe to kill them directly, and no one would raise any objections. Now that Luo Fan was a guest from the outer domain, the situation was different. Not only was Luo Fan not guilty for not knowing, but it was also because as a level 3 pseudo-sage, this person was extremely curious about the situation of the outer domain. He was very concerned about it, and wanted to know some things about the outer domain from Luo Fan. Luo Fan was skilled and bold. This level 3 pseudo-sage completely erupted with his strength. In the end, he was only a level 8 pseudo-sage, which was not enough in his eyes. However, he did not have to worry at all that the other party would plot against him in the process. Therefore, he nodded and smiled. I couldn't ask for more. I really want to learn about this world from you. Yong Shozi smiled slightly and said, I was also going to ask about the outer domain from you. That's perfect. Please, fellow Taoist. As he said that, Yong Shozi brought Luo Fan to the planet, where he originally lived. It was an extremely solemn palace. The palace was richly ornamented, and almost every part of it gave off a majestic and sacred feeling, creating a shocking effect. However, it did not look like a residence, but more like a temple for people to worship. This is to maintain majesty. I have no choice but to do so. Yong Shozi saw the slight change in Luo Fan's eyes and could not help but explain with a smile. Hearing this, Luo Fan nodded and said, I understand. Suddenly, Luo Fan's expression changed slightly, and he frowned slightly. He suddenly felt that a familiar aura suddenly appeared in this world out of nowhere. Moreover, they entered this world through the space-time tunnel that he had opened previously. That was obviously the Book Supreme and the others. Is there anything wrong? Yong Shozi paid attention to Luo Fan. Seeing that Luo Fan's expression was not right, he asked. Luo Fan let out a sigh and said, I won't hide it from fellow Taoist. I accidentally entered this world because I was being chased by someone. Now the person who is chasing me is a Taoist. Now, the person chasing me has also entered this world. Oh, so you are also from another domain. Yong Shozi's eyes lit up. What kind of friendship did he have with Luo Fan? The most important reason he had invited Luo Fan as a guest was that Luo Fan was a guest from another domain. He was not interested in the grudges between Luo Fan and others. Now that he heard that there were more guests from another domain besides Luo Fan, he naturally felt that there would be more opportunities to learn more about the other domains. How could he not be happy? Luo Fan naturally knew what he was thinking, but he did not care and just smiled and said, yes. The people chasing me are 18 level 9 venerables. Well, in our world, that's how they are called, the people who have reached the last step below the sage. I wonder if they are called the same in this world? Hearing this, Yong Shozi's expression changed. Level 9 venerables. Obviously, in this world, the people who had reached the 9th step below the sage, which was also the last step, were also called level 9 venerables. At this moment, Yong Shozi directly dispelled the idea of leaving Luo Fan aside and going to communicate with those people who were chasing him when he heard that Luo Fan had entered this world. Although he had merged with this planet and a part of this universe, he could only be compared to a pseudo-sage level 8 venerables at most. A pseudo-sage level 9 venerables was still an unattainable realm for him. His strength was simply at the level of an ant in front of a pseudo-sage level 9 venerables. Under such circumstances, how could a pseudo-sage level 9 venerables communicate with him on an equal footing? Don't just erase him with one hand and directly read his memories. He would already be laughing up his sleeve. How could he dare to ask for real communication? This was the situation of a pseudo-sage level 9 venerables. If the number of pseudo-sage level 9 venerables had increased to more than a dozen, the situation would obviously be even more dangerous. If it was a pseudo-sage level 9 venerables, perhaps he might even have a chance to communicate with him on an equal footing because of positive emotions such as benevolence. If there were more than a dozen pseudo-sage level 9 venerables, there would almost certainly be people who were unwilling to communicate with him. In this case, if he went to communicate with them, he would definitely be delivering himself to their doorstep. In other words, he would be delivering his memory to their doorstep. In contrast, Luo Fan, who is only a pseudo-sage level 7 venerables, was a better person to communicate with. Chapter 1448. As a level 3 false sage, he could only display the strength of a level 8 false sage, yet he dared to think that he could completely suppress him and control the situation. This kind of confidence could almost be regarded as arrogance. Watermark advertisement test. Watermark advertisement test. He only smiled faintly and did not say anything. At this time, young Shozi had already prepared himself mentally. He sighed and said, "What do you plan to do now? Are you going to hide somewhere?" Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and said, "No, I'm going to give them some surprises." As he said this, he stood up and raised his hand. The heaven cauldron of divine court appeared above his head. Then, the heaven cauldron of divine court spun and spat out a huge axe from the mouth of the cauldron. It directly broke through the void and broke through the sky. Throughout the whole process, young Shozi could not react at all. The power of the magical powers he mastered, all the strength he had on this planet, and his control over the power of this part of the universe could not stop Luo Fan at all. In a trance, young Shozi finally realized how big the gap between him and Luo Fan was. In an instant, his expression became somewhat unsightly. He thought of all his previous thoughts and calculations, and his heart was really flustered. Naturally, Luo Fan did not care about the changes in young Shozi's mentality. At this time, he had already used the power of the heaven cauldron to restrain the huge axe and directly broke through the void to the place where the Book Supreme and the others had entered. Over there, the space-time channel that Luo Fan had just closed opened once again, emitting an aura. It was the aura of the world that Luo Fan had left previously. Similar to Luo Fan's reaction when he entered this world, the Book Supreme and the others also had a shocked expression on their faces. The Book Supreme even murmured, "This world." After entering this world, the Book Supreme and the others had already felt the aura of the sages that they could only feel in the demon realm. Moreover, the aura of this sage was completely different from the aura of the sages that they were extremely familiar with in the past. It was clearly a different sage. Apart from that, because they were different from Luo Fan, who had understood the essence of their own cultivation, they could not be like Luo Fan, unaffected by the different layers of laws of the world. He had perfectly displayed his strength. The law layer of this world was as complex as the demon realm. However, it instantly created a huge problem for them. As a result, they were only able to display 10 to 20% of their originally perfect strength. If they wanted to display their strength as perfectly as they did in other worlds, they would have to do so. There was only one way. That was just like when Luo Fan first entered the Devil Realm. He worked hard to analyze the rules and laws of this world and worked hard to comprehend the great Tao of this world. It was a great Tao that belonged to a branch of the great Tao of the universe on Earth. And it required time and methods. Even though they were all powerful level 9 pseudo-sages, it was impossible for them to complete this process in a short period of time. Therefore, at this moment, they could be said to be the weakest they had ever been since Luo Fan knew them. At this moment, in addition to the shock in their hearts, they felt that they had been frogs at the bottom of a well in the past. After experiencing the tens of millions of worlds, they had already speculated that there was a world that could be comparable to the world that they were born in, and they had somewhat subverted their previous understanding of the world. But now, when the real female bum saw that this world was not much different from the demon world, and even had other mysteries compared to the demon world, They truly felt that their previous understanding of the world was indeed so shallow. The world really had more mysteries than they had imagined. While they were still in shock and introspection, an axe suddenly tore through the air and fiercely chopped down on all of them. "This is my magic treasure." Among them, the level 9 pseudo-sage who had attacked Luo Fan, but had his magic treasure snatched away by Luo Fan, exclaimed. There was both horror and joy in this exclamation. Naturally, they were horrified because the axe was coming down on them, trying to finish them off. The joy was obviously because the magic treasure that had been snatched away from him and he thought he could never get it back had now reappeared in front of him, giving him a chance to get it back. "It is indeed your magic treasure. But now we'd better find a way to block this move." The book master roared, and the magic treasure that looked like a thread-bound book above his head vibrated slightly, guiding the power of all the level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasures to suddenly vibrate, producing a seemingly substantial spiritual light that rushed towards the axe and collided with it. Normally, the combined power of more than a dozen level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasures was much more powerful than a level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure. However, at this moment, under the control of the bookmaster, the combined power of more than a dozen level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasures was only on par with the power of the axe-like magic treasure. In a violent vibration, the space-time within a radius of several light-years was completely destroyed. All the matter in this space-time was completely devoured and turned into a part of the gray chaos formed after the destruction of the space-time. Only around the Book Supreme and the others, there was a layer of strange light that blocked the impact of the chaos, allowing them to protect themselves from being hurt by the chaos. Damn it, I can't even fully exert the power of the magic treasure. The bookmaster cursed, forcibly suppressing the vibration caused by the dissipation of the power of the magic treasure, and tried hard to calm his power and mind. In this world, level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasures needed to analyze the rules and laws again in order to fully exert their power. This level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure was no exception. The combination of the two would not make up for each other and rebalance the power. Instead, it would only make the disadvantages worse. Therefore, when he guided the power of the magic treasure to resist the impact of the axe, he appeared so weak. The combined power of more than a dozen level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasures and the power of more than a dozen level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasures were actually shattered by the power of a level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure. As a very experienced fighter, the Book Supreme naturally knew what would happen at this moment. Suppressing the impact on him, he once again borrowed the power of the thread-bound, book-like magic treasure above his head and gathered the power of over a dozen level 9 pseudo-divine treasures to create a ray of spiritual light, trying to block the attack somewhere in the void. There was a loud bang. The spiritual light collided with something again, and another earth-shattering impact and destruction broke out from the point of collision. The chaos and influence caused by this process had caused the intense chaos in the surroundings to become even more severe. It had even reached a state where things would reverse when they reached an extreme. In the midst of the chaos, a strange world actually appeared. Because of the hasty block, the power of the dozen level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasures condensed by the bookmaster was completely destroyed this time. The strong impact directly broke through the defense. It suddenly acted on all of them. This was an axe light. It contained a kind of power that could destroy everything. Is your magic treasure so powerful? Wu Zun could not help but shout at the original owner of the axe at this time. The countenance of a level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure changed. Although he failed to block it again, because they had just entered this world, they could not fully exert their strength, and the power of this magic treasure could not be fully exerted. But more importantly, the power of this axe was far beyond their imagination. It was even more powerful than when it was in the hands of the level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure. His natal magic treasure could actually exert more power in the hands of others than when it was in his hands. After a short period of research, others actually had a deeper understanding of this magic treasure than him, who had refined it from the materials and the power it could exert was even more powerful. This was simply a great humiliation. How could the level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure still remain calm? Fortunately, although the axe light broke through the defense of the dozen level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasures and blasted toward them. But they were still level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasures. Although they did not expect it and blocked it in a hurry, they still destroyed the axe light in the end. None of them was injured by the axe light. At this moment, the book master roared. The Dharma treasures above their heads naturally erupted with power. Powerful and unparalleled power condensed, turning into a seemingly corporeal spiritual light that took the shape of a fist. It directly smashed towards a certain place in the void, towards the chaos. At this moment, a huge axe appeared in front of the fist. As the axe swung down, it seemed as if Pangu had split the heavens and the earth. It directly tore through time and space and cut through the world. On the axe, there was a faint turbidity that kept circling around it. Looking at this axe, the level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure felt as if he had been struck by lightning. Is this really something that a pseudo-sage magic treasure cultivator can control? He muttered to himself. In his eyes, there was only the repeating trajectory of the axe as it sliced through the void. He had refined his natal magic treasure into the shape of an axe, which meant that his understanding and control of the axe had reached an unimaginable level. All this while he had encountered so many level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasures and gotten to know so many cultivators. This also proved that in this world, apart from his master, no one had such a deep understanding of the axe. No one's control of the axe was as superb as his. Even when he excluded his master, it was only out of respect for his master. He even suspected that his master's control of the axe was not as good as his. It could be said that he had always thought that he was the existence with the best control of the axe. However, the axe in front of him had completely shattered all of his pride and confidence. Before such an axe appeared, he would never have thought that such an axe existed in this world. This was an axe that could split the heavens and the earth. It was an axe that could split the chaos. In a trance, the level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure had completely lost all sense of the outside world. All he could think about was the trajectory of the axe and the mystery of the axe, while the level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure was immersed in the mystery of the axe. The bookmaster and the others were already horrified. That chop was effortless. It had already split the fist formed by more than a dozen level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasures. The entire process was like a knife cutting through butter. After splitting the power of more than a dozen level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasures, the axe seemed to be pressing towards the crowd at an extremely slow speed. However, the crowd found that they could not put up any resistance against such a slow axe. They only felt that their bodies and their thoughts had become even slower, to the point that they could not react to the axe at all. Although they were very unfamiliar with this feeling, they had almost never felt it before. However, as the disciple of the Holy Venerate, the level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasure, they were naturally experienced and knowledgeable. So they instantly knew that their sense of time had been completely taken over by the axe and had become distorted. They had completely lost their normal senses. At this very moment, it was not that the axe was really slow. It was that the axe had reached the limit of speed. It had surpassed time and space. It had transcended their senses and their perception of time. Only in this way could they have such a strange feeling. We can't stop him here. The bookmaster instantly made up his mind. He roared, and a burst of power burst out of his body and rushed towards the axe. This power was not the bookmaster's own power. It contained the aura of the holy will and a trace of eternal and indestructible charm. Luo Fan was very familiar with such a power. That was the power of the holy venerables. This power broke through the shock of the axe and made the bookmaster and the rest feel normal. The axe in their eyes also returned to normal. It was as if it had surpassed time and arrived in front of them without experiencing time at all then, the power shook in the void, and a strong impact spread out, directly suppressing all the chaos within a range of several light years. The space within a range of several light years returned to its original state of absolute completeness and absolute smoothness, forming the appearance of a cosmic void again. At this moment, the axe had already collided with the power. In an instant, a strong wave began to sweep in all directions from the point of collision. It surged and tried to destroy the void, but it could not take shape. It only caused the space within a range of several light years to show countless strange scenes that were constantly intertwining and changing. Let's go. After all, Master's power is like water without a source. It won't be able to hold out for long. The Bookmaster said decisively. They were all level 9 pseudo-saints, so naturally none of them were stupid, although they were unwilling in their hearts. No one said anything along the lines of, "I'm not leaving." Soon, the dozen-level 9 pseudo-saints entered the space-time tunnel behind them and quickly left this world. As they left, the power of the Holy Venerate shook slightly and collapsed. Under the bombardment of the axe, it collapsed into countless pieces of power and was directly devoured by the world. The moment this power was devoured by the world, an inexplicable joy suddenly spread out and was directly sensed by Luo Fan in the distance. Then he felt a power that he had not sensed for a long time, being born from the world and descending on him. This was merit. Sensing the existence of the merit, Luo Fan could not help but frown. He raised his hand and slapped it. The invisible and intangible merit directly condensed into a merit seal in his hand. This technique was actually created after he was inspired by the Een Venerate's technique while he was chatting with the Een Venerate. This merit seal was actually equivalent to the merit halo that he had seen in the heavenly abode that the saint had created back then. When the merit seal was in his hand, he knew where the merit came from. The power that the Bookmaster had released earlier was used by the Bookmaster as his last resort. Needless to say, it was extremely powerful and could definitely kill an ordinary level 9 pseudo-saint instantly. After such a power was dispersed by Luo Fan, it directly integrated into the world and was devoured by the world. This was equivalent to a powerful level 9 pseudo-saint being devoured by the world. Although this wasn't a huge supplement for this world, it definitely wasn't just a small supplement either. In this way, Luo Fan, who had dispersed the power and integrated it into the world, had obviously contributed to the world. Thus, it naturally stimulated the great Tao of the world to react. Thus, merit was bestowed. When he was controlling the magic treasure to fight with the Bookmaster and the rest, Luo Fan's incarnation had always been on Yongshou's planet and had been sitting opposite Yongshou. Although Yongshou was extremely weak compared to Luo Fan, he was still a level 3 pseudo-saint. Since he was only a short distance away from the place where the battle had taken place, he naturally could clearly sense what had happened there. Although the space-time within a radius of several light years was destroyed and turned into chaos, he could guess how intense the battle was just by sensing the intensity of the changes. He could also guess how powerful the two parties involved were. The battle between Luo Fan and the Bookmaster took a long time to describe. In fact, it only took a few breaths. In eternal longevity, Z's opinion, Luo Fan merely raised his hand to summon a cauldron-shaped magic treasure, and then the magic treasure spat out another magic treasure. After that, a shocking commotion erupted in the distance. Time and space were destroyed several times. Immediately after, it was the joy of heaven and earth. A dazzling golden seal appeared in the hands of the person in front of him. Young Shozi did not react at first, but when Luo Fan began to examine the seal, he almost jumped up. "This is merit." Luo Fan smiled. He said, "It is indeed merit. Originally, I only planned to chase away those enemies who were chasing after me from this world, but I didn't expect to receive the favor of the heaven and earth. This is an unexpected surprise." As he spoke, the giant axe that had rushed out of the divine court's heavenly cauldron had already returned, returning to the divine court's heavenly cauldron. Previously, with the help of this axe, the attacks that shocked the Bookmaster and the others seemed easy, But in fact, every move and every style had almost exhausted Luo Fan's deduction ability. His wisdom was displayed to the fullest. In the end, the axe had almost made the book master despair, and he could only use the life-saving means that the Holy Senior had left for him, contained all the understanding he had when he opened up the perfect world between the heaven and earth and the chaotic gap. If this still could not drive the bookmaster and the others away, Luo Fan was afraid that he would have to give up the plan to drive them away and let them leave this world. Fortunately, the result was still gratifying. After that move, the bookmaster and the others finally lost their confidence and fled this world in a panic. Since they fled in such a manner, at least in a short time, they would not come back again. This gave Luo Fan some time of peace. However, although the result was gratifying, the price he had to pay was not small. At least, at this moment, the level 9 pseudo-sage treasure in the shape of an axe had suffered a great deal of damage, and there were faint signs that it was about to break away from the suppression of the divine court's heavenly cauldron. This required him to spend time to repair and suppress it again. While Luo Fan was secretly weighing the gains and losses of this trip, Young Shozi was looking at Luo Fan with a gaze that seemed to be filled with jealousy, envy, and disappointment. I didn't expect that in this world there is actually someone who can obtain the merit of heaven and earth. Fellow Taoist, your luck is really so strong that it makes people jealous, he said after a while. Hearing this, Luo Fan could not help but return to his senses. He was secretly surprised and said, Fellow Taoist, why do you say so? If one benefits the heaven and earth, there will be merit of heaven and earth. This is the truth in any world. The only difference is whether it is more or less obvious or not. Why do you say that no one can obtain the merit of heaven and earth? Hearing this, Young Shozi said, Fellow Taoist, there is something you don't know. Our world is completely different from other worlds. In our world, it is said that when the world was first created, it was indeed the same as other worlds. As long as one does something beneficial to the heaven and earth, there will naturally be merit of heaven and earth. Moreover, it is said that the merit of heaven and earth is more than that of other worlds. However, since some time ago, there's been no merit of heaven and earth. No matter how much one benefits the heaven and earth, no merit of heaven and earth will be merit of heaven and earth. I have cultivated for billions of years, but this is the first time I have seen the merit of heaven and earth. I didn't expect the merit of heaven and earth to be so mysterious. It is more than 10,000 times stronger than the merit of human Tao. Hearing Young Shozi's words, Luo Fan deeply frowned. Chapter 1449. He felt that the heaven and earth merit was a hot potato. Of course, it was not because it was extremely precious, but because he felt that many people would be interested in it and it would bring him a lot of trouble. It was because the heaven and earth merit had not appeared for so many years and had never been obtained by an ordinary cultivator. This obviously meant that there was an extremely deep secret in the heaven and earth merit. This deep secret involved the entire world, the entire universe, and all the cultivators and powerhouses from ancient times to the present. In a world with sages, such a secret was most likely related to the sages. In other words, it was very likely that the sages did not want the heaven and earth merit to appear in the world. Under such circumstances, it could be said that the sages were very likely to stand opposite the sages after he obtained the heaven and earth merit. How could he not feel that the heaven and earth merit was a hot potato? Although he did not think that the sages in this world were real sages. However, regardless of whether they were real sages or not, judging from the powerful aura that filled the entire world, the power of his magical powers and his strength could not be compared to the current Luo Fan. It would be a great pressure for anyone to stand opposite someone that they could not compare to. Of course, although he felt that the heaven and earth merit was a hot potato, Luo Fan obviously would not give it away just like that. However, after a moment of vigilance, he put away the merit seal in his hand and said, I didn't expect the heaven and earth merit to have such a secret. It seems that my luck is quite good. It was unknown whether Young Shozi could not see the hidden danger behind it, or he was pretending not to see it. However, he nodded with an envious look and said, "That's right. After obtaining the heaven and earth merit, there will no longer be any problem with your current identity. Regardless of which cultivator it is, they will no longer be able to criticize you as a guest from a foreign land." Luo Fan said with a smile, "There's nothing to criticize about the identity of a guest from a foreign region. An existence that can grow to the false sage level will definitely not be as shallow as ordinary living beings. They will definitely have an understanding of the fact that there are many worlds beyond the heaven and earth. My identity should be very ordinary." Master Yongshou shook his head and said, "Fellow Taoist, you are mistaken. Even though we know of the existence of other worlds, for us, the other worlds are all comparatively lower-level worlds. For ordinary cultivators, they are foreign visitors. It was just like how a rich superpower looked at a visitor from a poor country. They would definitely look down on him. If it weren't for the heaven and earth merit, I'm afraid fellow Taoist would have fallen to such a state. However, things were different now. Now, with the existence of heaven and earth merit, not only would no one dare to criticize you, but you would also be able to do so. It's even to the extent that most cultivators won't be able to tell that you're a foreigner." When Luo Fan heard this, he suddenly understood. With the status of this world, this kind of mentality was quite normal. After all, this world was a world with sages. As a world that could nurture countless pseudo-sage cultivators. Its level was many times higher than that of an ordinary vast thousand world. As such, among the worlds that this world came into contact with, all of them were worlds that were a level lower than this world. For the living beings in this world, they felt that this world was obviously the highest and most powerful world among all worlds. If this was in the secular world, it would be equivalent to this world being a superpower that was far more powerful than all other countries. And all the other worlds, except for this one, were all impoverished countries struggling to feed themselves. With such a comparison, one could see the mentality of the cultivators in this world. Their confidence, their pride, their discrimination against the living beings of other worlds, and their wariness towards the living beings from other worlds were obviously reasonable. "I see, I was indeed wrong." Luo Fan sighed. Next, he changed the topic and began to ask Yongshouzi about the various situations in this world. Before knowing how powerful Luo Fan was, Yongshouzi would definitely not answer Luo Fan's questions honestly. He would definitely trade with Luo Fan. If Yongshouzi answered a question, he would definitely ask Luo Fan to answer a question about the foreign world. However, after witnessing Luo Fan's strength and sensing that Luo Fan could destroy him, the surrounding starry sky, and the surrounding universe at any time, how would he dare to do so? At this moment, he could not wait to answer Luo Fan's questions and send Luo Fan away. How would he dare to talk nonsense? Hence, although he appeared calm and seemed to be on equal footing with Luo Fan, he answered all of Luo Fan's questions without holding back. However, when it came to Luo Fan's questions, he answered everything he knew without reserve. As for his own questions, he only asked them carefully when Luo Fan seemed to be in a good mood to talk about them. He did not dare to ask too many questions about Luo Fan's answers. It was as if he could read Luo Fan's minds. He would only nod to indicate that he understood what Luo Fan meant. This unequal exchange lasted for more than 10 days before it stopped. At this point, Luo Fan had a much deeper understanding of this world than before. He also had a relatively complete grasp of the various situations in this world. The living beings in this world called this world the central main world. This was because in the eyes of the living beings in this world was the center of countless worlds and the most powerful existence among them. There were sages in this central main world. This was exactly what Luo Fan had sensed. However, what surprised Luo Fan was that there were relatively few sages in this world. There were only 3 sages in this world. These 3 sages were also known as the 3 ancestors by all living beings in this world. They were the Tao ancestor and the demon ancestor, the Buddha ancestor, All the cultivation systems in this entire world came from the three of them. It was the three of them who had created the three major cultivation systems of this world. It was the three of them who had created the three major cultivation systems of this world. They had transformed this world from a primitive, wild world into a powerful world with an extremely prosperous cultivation civilization. It had become such a vast and powerful world that had given birth to an unknown number of level 9 false sages. The Tao, demon, and Buddha ancestors were both enemies and friends. There seemed to be conflicts and disputes between them. However, they also seemed to support and depend on each other. It was an extremely special and complicated relationship. The three ancestors also lived in this world like the sages of the demon world. If one looked up at the sky from the surface of any planet, they would be able to see that in the center of the stars, there were three stars that were brighter than all the other stars. That was where the three ancestors lived. However, although the three planets could be seen from the surface of any planet before the summoning of the three ancestors, no living beings, not even the most powerful venerables or the disciples of the three ancestors, had ever taken the initiative to go to the three planets. Just like that, those three planets seemed to be in a different space-time, another world. Each of the three patriarchs had countless disciples, and the weakest of them all of them were at the pseudo-saint level. The strongest among them had even reached the level of a supremacy. However, the number of disciples who had obtained the inheritance of the three ancestors was unimaginably high. At least, this was beyond Luo Fan's imagination. Although there were 54 sages in the realm of devils, Luo Fan had only seen one disciple, Nanzun, after entering the realm of devils for millions of years. According to Nanzun, Taoist Shui only had less than 10 disciples, which was similar to the number of disciples under the other sages. In this way, the number of disciples of the sages in the entire realm of devils was only slightly more than 500. Compared to the vast and boundless realm of devils, this number was extremely low. However, what was different from the realm of devils was that although there were only 3 sages in the central main world, the number of direct disciples of the sages numbered in the hundreds of thousands. If the disciples of the direct disciples of the sages were included, the number would probably increase by 100 times, reaching a terrifying level of tens of millions. Each of these direct disciples of the sages were scattered in a certain area of the universe, and each of them controlled all the stars within an unknown number of light years. It could be said that the entire universe was actually completely in the hands of the direct disciples of the sages. Just like in this universe where Luo Fan was located, there were hundreds of thousands of life planets within a radius of several 100 million light years. In fact, they were controlled by a level 8 pseudo-sage direct disciple of the Gautama Buddha. Similar to Yongshou Zi, the direct disciple of the Gautama Buddha had also merged with the universe within a radius of hundreds of millions of light years and could mobilize the power of this universe. Although he was a level 8 pseudo-sage, the power he could display was definitely not any weaker than that of a supremacy, which was a level 9 pseudo-sage with a holy decree. Each of the hundreds of thousands of direct disciples controlled the universe within a radius of hundreds of millions of light years. This was enough to show how vast this world was. I didn't expect the sages of this universe to have so many disciples, but this is normal. After all, there were only 3 sages, and the battle between them was easier to control and balance. The intensity of the battle would definitely be restrained. In this way, the chances of the disciples they had accepted from ancient times to the present would definitely be relatively small. With the accumulation of days and nights, it's very normal for them to have so many direct disciples, Luo Fan thought to himself, and the shock in his heart gradually faded with this thought. Apart from the most crucial information about the sages, Yongshou Zi also told him many things about this world. For example, there were places that were forbidden areas in this world that no one could leave unscathed after entering. Another example was the location that was a dangerous place and what kind of dangers there were. Another example was the location that had things that were beneficial to cultivators and so on and so forth. There were so many that Luo Fan's horizons were really widened, and he suddenly felt like he was gradually integrating into this world. This world is not inferior to the demon realm at all. However, why is there no news about this world in the Earth's universe? Why is there only news about the demon realm? After familiarizing himself with this world, Luo Fan was puzzled. In the Earth's universe, he had heard news about the demon realm from many places, and he had even come into contact with traces of the invasion of the demon realm's level 9 pseudo-sages. However, he had never heard of this central main world. It was as if this central main world did not exist at all. This situation was rather strange. It was extremely strange, difficult for one to understand, and even more unimaginable. Perhaps this has something to do with the abnormality of the merits of the universe. A thought suddenly popped into his mind. It was very natural for such a thought to appear. There was no news about this world in the Earth's universe, and this was an abnormality. The fact that the merits of the universe could not descend from this world was another abnormality. It was natural for these two abnormalities to be linked together. As he thought of this, Luo Fan's feeling that the merits of the universe were a hot potato became even more intense. However, at the same time, his curiosity about the merits of the universe grew stronger. Let me see what abnormalities there are in the merits of the universe. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan bid farewell to Yongshou Zi and left. Yongshou Zi had been suppressed by Luo Fan, who was so powerful that he could easily crush him, for such a long time that he had been desperately hoping for Luo Fan to leave. Now that he heard Luo Fan leave, he did not even bother to ask him to stay. He didn't even bother to ask Luo Fan to stay. Instead, he eagerly sent Luo Fan off his planet. In the end, he even personally gave Luo Fan a rule that didn't exist in this world as a gift. This law was something that Master Eternal Longevity had obtained by chance when he had sensed the outer realms in the past. It was a strange law of the outer realms. The power of this rule was not very strong. However, it represented a completely different kind of wonder from this world. For cultivators who were born and raised in this world, it could be a great revelation. It could give any cultivator who obtained this rule a brand new inspiration, allowing their cultivation to improve unexpectedly. However, this rule was useless to Luo Fan. It was of little value. Luo Fan had passed through tens of millions of worlds, and the various strange laws and principles he had seen were truly innumerable. Even though the strange laws of the outer realm before him possessed some special and miraculous effects, it was merely a novelty to him. If he wanted to find similar laws, then he could casually recall and search through his memories, and he would naturally be able to find thousands of them. Therefore, Luo Fan only smiled at this rule, put it away indifferently, and turned to leave Yongshou Zi's planet. After Luo Fan put away the rule and left, Yongshou Zi looked relaxed. I finally sent off this plague. I hope no one found out that the merit of the universe stopped at my planet. He muttered. How could any cultivator who could cultivate to the pseudo-sage level be stupid? The moment Luo Fan heard the abnormality of the merit of the universe, he could guess that there was a deep secret behind it, and that it was extremely troublesome. Yongshou Zi was born and raised in this world, and had been pondering this for hundreds of millions of years. How could he not have noticed this? The reason why he had displayed such indifference earlier, as if he had not noticed anything unusual at all, was merely an act to avoid having anything to do with the karma of the heavens and earth. Karma was something that existed in every world, in every heaven and earth. The only difference was in the strength and importance of the karma. If Yongshou Zi showed doubt about the merit of the universe, it would naturally cause a change in karmic connections, and traces would naturally be left behind. If an expert came to investigate in the future, they would definitely trace it back to him. To avoid this, he could only do his best to pretend that he did not notice anything, and do his best to pretend that he was extremely envious of the merit of the universe. Although this method was very likely to be useless, it was, after all, the best solution he could think of. No matter how young Shozi thought about it, he was still worried and could only mutter, "I've really suffered a huge loss this time." Then, spiritual light began to radiate from his body and gradually spread to the entire planet and the surrounding void of the universe. Under the shroud of this spiritual light, the planet and the void of the universe seemed to be gradually isolated from the outside world, and a kind of independence was gradually emitted from it. The spiritual light became stronger, more condensed, and more dazzling. In the process of constantly emitting this spiritual light, the muscles on young Shozi's face began to tremble, and he seemed to be extremely strained. This process continued without end. Gradually, cold sweat began to appear on young Shozi's body. As a level 3 pseudo-sage, the strength that he could exert was equivalent to that of a level 8 pseudo-sage. His body breaking out in cold sweat was simply as unbelievable as an ordinary person suddenly flying in the sky. This process lasted for several hours. When the spiritual light that enveloped the planet and the void of the universe was so strong that it seemed to be solid, and it seemed to have become a real and unbreakable existence, young Shozi suddenly let out a loud roar. Following this roar, the planet and the void of the universe around it shook violently. There was a violent tremor. Amidst this violent tremor, the planet began to gradually fade and finally disappeared without a trace. At the same time, in a location that was unknown how many billions of light years away from this area, a similar planet slowly appeared from the illusion. At the beginning, it was just a faint shadow. But as time passed, this shadow became stronger and stronger and more obvious. Finally, the entire shadow completely turned into a real planet. This planet was exactly the planet that Luo Fan had stayed on before. At this moment, Young Shozi was on this planet. His face was extremely pale, and the power in his body had already fallen to rock bottom. He felt that even his cultivation realm seemed to be unstable, and there were signs that it was about to degenerate. Clearly, just now, young Shozi had used his own powerful magical ability. He had directly moved his planet and the void of the universe that he was in from its original location. He had directly teleported it to this place that was unknown how many billions of light years away from the original location. This time, it's really a big loss. I didn't expect this transportation magical ability to consume so much power. Young Shozi's face was full of regret. What he regretted was, of course, not that he had used a transportation magical ability to move the planet and the void of the universe to this place. Instead, he regretted that he had been meddlesome and invited Luo Fan to his planet back then. If he had known that Luo Fan was so powerful and would receive the merit of the universe, he definitely would not have said a word and allowed Luo Fan to collect information on his planet before leaving on his own. However, things had already been done, and young Shozi did not regret it for long. After sensing that there were no abnormalities after the planet had been teleported to this place, he sealed his cave abode and directly began to cultivate in the cave abode. He wanted to make up for the damage he had suffered from using a transportation magical ability as soon as possible. As for the living beings on this planet, suddenly discovering that the starry sky in the sky had suddenly changed, and the cultivators discovering that there were problems with their techniques and magical abilities that used the power of the stars, young Shou naturally could not be bothered with these trivial matters. The method that he had chosen to move the planet from its original location was actually not rare in this world. In an ordinary universe, every star was a part of the entire universe's celestial system. The conversion of any star's position would require thorough consideration and many calculations before it could be done. Otherwise, it would very likely cause chaos in the celestial system, resulting in serious consequences. However, in this world, because there were many disciples of the three ancestors who controlled almost every starry sky in the entire universe, the situation was different. The entire celestial system was rather stable because of their suppression. A single change in the position of a star or a small change in the void of the universe would definitely not affect the entire celestial system. In this way, The position of the stars in this world would only be determined by the controller of the planet. As long as the controller was willing and could bear the consequences of doing so, he could place his planet wherever he wanted. Of course, this was only the theoretical basis for moving planets at will. Normally, any cultivator who wanted to move the position of a planet had to consider more things. First of all, he needed to consider the thoughts of the controller of the region where the planet was originally located. Secondly, he needed to consider the thoughts of the controller of the region where the planet had been moved. Therefore, normally speaking, if a planet's controller wanted to move the planet's location, they would need to coordinate with many parties and apply for many applications before they could do it. It was not like Young Shozi's current carefree and hasty way of doing it. Chapter 1450. After Luo Fan left the planet, he directly came to a cosmic starry sky without any stars. Here, he casually opened up a great thousand world and built a cave mansion that he needed. However, even so, he could still sense Young Shozi's behavior after he left. Watermark advertisement, test watermark advertisement, test. When he saw Young Shozi moving the planet away immediately, he instantly knew Young Shozi's mentality, but he secretly found it funny. I didn't expect him to hide it so well. It seems that my vigilance is still not very high, he thought. He put the matter of Young Shozi to the back of his mind. After all, he and Young Shozi had only met by chance. Now that he had obtained the information he needed from Young Shozi, he naturally did not need to care about his own choice. In any case, no matter what Young Shozi chose, it would not hurt him. In the sector that he had opened up, Luo Fan took out the merit seal that he had put away previously. This merit seal shone with golden light, and it looked like it naturally had a kind of sacred charm. Although the merit seal was condensed from invisible material merits, after Luo Fan's method, this condensation had the effect of turning nothingness into reality. It made the merit seal seem very real and condensed, as if it was made of real material. Luo Fan constructed the merit seal based on the essence of merits. It was constructed by its essence, so its appearance was not completely determined by Luo Fan. Instead, it was formed under the influence of the essence of merit. Therefore, even Luo Fan was not completely clear about what the merit seal would look like after it was condensed. At this moment, the merit seal lying in Luo Fan's hand was square. Because it was condensed from the merits of heaven and earth, it was squarish in shape, but it seemed to outline a universe on its surface. There were stars on the surface of the merit seal. He flipped the front of the merit seal. There were only two strange words engraved on it: heaven and earth. These words, they were words that Luo Fan had never seen before, whether it was the language of the earth universe or the language of the demon realm. Even the words of the primordial world and the Tianyuan world were completely different. However, even if it was different, but from these two words, it could be seen that this type of writing was extremely perfect, mysterious, and complicated. The two words were so complicated that it made Luo Fan's mind go into a mess, of course. The current Luo Fan was able to see the intent attached to these words with a single glance. But he instantly knew the meaning of these two words: heaven and earth merit. Looking at the merit seal, Luo Fan suddenly felt an inexplicable excitement in his heart. The merit of heaven and earth in this world was too strange, and it had greatly aroused his curiosity. Under such circumstances, how could he not be excited when he had something that could satisfy his curiosity in his hands? He took a deep breath and slowly pointed at the merit seal. In an instant, the merit seal collapsed, and all the merit of heaven and earth dissipated. It began to look for the target of the merit of heaven and earth and attach itself to it. In other words, it began to attach itself to Luo Fan. The merit of heaven and earth might be a treasure for those cultivators who were interested in the merit path, but for Luo Fan, it was just a shackle. He was not willing to completely integrate the merit of heaven and earth with him. Therefore, at this moment, a shadow walked out of his body and directly integrated with the merit of heaven and earth. It was a shadow, an extremely broken incarnation. It had Luo Fan's aura, but it could completely deceive the heaven and earth, making the heaven and earth think that it was Luo Fan. In this way, Luo Fan did not need to truly integrate with the heaven and earth to be able to completely sense all the changes that would happen after he integrated with the merit of heaven and earth. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly felt that his relationship with the heaven and earth had undergone a huge change. Vaguely, the heaven and earth gave him the feeling of a mother, as if he was born from the heaven and earth. A kind of inexplicable, childish admiration was actually born naturally. Good Lord, luckily, I didn't completely integrate with the merit of heaven and earth. Luo Fan could not help but feel extremely lucky at this moment. The merit of heaven and earth was almost a channel that connected him to the heaven and earth. As long as he obtained the merit of heaven and earth, the power of the heaven and earth would naturally descend upon him and begin to change his mind, his thoughts, and his choices. Thus, he naturally developed an inexplicable good impression of the heaven and earth. This method may not have been malicious, but it was clearly contrary to the various things that Luo Fan had persisted in all these years of cultivation. After carefully savoring the various feelings that came from the broken incarnation for a while, Luo Fan began to return to his roots and began to trace the changes in the merit of heaven and earth. He began to search for the laws that affected the merit of heaven and earth, as well as the great Tao that was connected to them. The reason why this heaven and earth was so secretive and unnoticed by others might be related to the abnormality of the merit of heaven and earth. What Luo Fuan wanted to find now was the source of this abnormality, and the reason that ultimately affected the heaven and earth. Therefore, at this moment, he was paying attention to all the laws, and great Tao that were connected to the merit of heaven and earth. The laws of any world were extremely vast. The great Tao of any world would definitely be extremely profound and indescribably wonderful. As a world that could give birth to saints, this was naturally even more so. Even if Luo Fan was only searching for the laws that were connected to the merit of heaven and earth, even if he was only searching for the great Tao that was related to the merit of heaven and earth, it was still an extremely complicated task that involved all sorts of mysteries and principles. It was truly unfathomable and indescribably complex. In other words, it was almost impossible to obtain any results in a short period of time. Luo Fan's mind soared in the endless laws, and the endless mysteries were directly displayed to him in an extremely direct manner. And the great Tao that was hidden in the unseen world also gradually began to open up a corner to him. As time passed, he was in this process. His understanding of the merit of heaven and earth deepened, and his understanding of the merit of heaven and earth also increased. In the blink of an eye, several years had passed. On this day, he was searching for the laws in the cave abode. Luo Fan, who was searching for the great Tao, suddenly opened his eyes. It was an unbelievable divine light. Evidently, he had made a discovery. Moreover, this discovery was extremely out of his expectations. He almost did not dare to believe what he had discovered. All the merit of heaven and earth in this world has actually been received by some kind of living being. How is this possible? How can there be a living being that can receive all the merit of heaven and earth in a world that can give birth to sages? This was the only thought in Luo Fan's mind. After several years of comprehension, he finally discovered an extremely terrifying fact today. In the depths of the laws, in the depths of the great Tao, there was a strange aura that changed the entire merit of heaven and earth in this world. It caused the birth of the merit of heaven and earth in this world. Subtle changes occurred in the distribution of the merit of heaven and earth, such that the merit of heaven and earth could not ultimately fall into the hands of the person who created the merit of heaven and earth. Instead, they all went around in a circle and flowed to a certain location, and were completely received by some kind of living being. This situation was simply unimaginable. For any world to be perfect and complete, and not to suddenly collapse at any time, the circulation of its various laws must definitely be complete. Naturally, The merit of heaven and earth was no exception. Now, the merit of heaven and earth was actually flowing in a strange and unbalanced way to a fixed location. This situation obviously destroyed the circulation of the laws in this world and obviously affected the completeness of the great Tao of this world. In this way, this world could actually be so perfect, so powerful, and even give birth to 3 sages. This simply subverted Luo Fan's understanding of the world. How could he remain calm? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, Luo Fan suddenly had a flash of inspiration, and he discovered the source of the problem. Perhaps the problem lies in the fact that this world can give birth to sages. This thought completely suppressed all the doubts that had previously arisen in his mind. Ordinary living beings could not completely receive all the merit of heaven and earth in this world, as he felt at this moment. However, this did not mean that sages could not do it. Sages were omnipotent, omniscient, and great beings that knew everything. Even if the 3 sages in this world were not real sages, but rather sages that had some key differences from real sages, compared to non-sages, the power of their divine sense would not be much weaker than that of real sages. Therefore, it was extremely normal for the sages in this world to be able to do this. All kinds of thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind at this moment, and all kinds of speculations caused his expression to change constantly. Suddenly, a terrifying thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Could it be that the 3 sages in this world are sages who became sages through merit? As soon as this thought appeared, it swelled up crazily. In the end, it completely suppressed all other speculations, and the more he thought about it, the more convinced he was that this guess was the truth. Using this idea to see the abnormality of the merit of heaven and earth in this world, everything could be explained clearly. In the beginning, when this world had just been formed, it had merit of heaven and earth. As long as one contributed to this world, one would be able to receive merit of heaven and earth and receive the blessing of this world. Whether it was in cultivation or in battle, one would receive a huge blessing, and thus, the person who received merit of heaven and earth would become stronger and stronger. However, at some point, some cultivators discovered that after absorbing merit of heaven and earth without limit, their cultivation realm would increase without limit, and finally, they would break through the shackles of cultivators and become sages. After that, after countless killings and fights, there were finally cultivators who gathered endless merit of heaven and earth, broke through their limits, and became sages. They became existences who became sages through merit of heaven and earth. It was even possible that there was more than one person who became sages through merit of heaven and earth. It was possible that the current 3 ancestors of Tao, Devil, and Buddha had all become sages through merit of heaven and earth at the same time. After that, perhaps to cut off the path of future generations, or perhaps to strengthen themselves, the 3 ancestors who had become sages through merit of heaven and earth directly controlled the merit of heaven and earth in their hands, so that the merit of heaven and earth that was triggered by anyone would not actually land. Instead, it would flow directly to where the 3 of them were and be directly controlled by the 3 of them. It was also because of this that the situation of the world underwent a tremendous change. From then on, the world was completely different. From then on, no merit of heaven and earth was obtained by cultivators. Thinking from this angle, he suddenly understood why he could obtain the merit of heaven and earth in this world. Perhaps it was because he was an outsider, and the methods he used and the benefits he brought to this world had nothing to do with the 3 sages. It had no karmic connection with the 3 sages. Therefore, the merit of heaven and earth that was born would not trigger the methods set up by the 3 sages. It would not flow to the 3 sages, but directly to him. As for the reason why other cultivators could not do this, the root cause was that the 3 sages controlled the merit of heaven and earth in this world. But the direct reason, perhaps it was because all the cultivation methods of the cultivators in this world actually came from the 3 sages. Even the cultivators who created their own cultivation methods benefited from the cultivation system of this world that the three sages had created. It was also related to the three sages. After thinking about all these, Luo Fan suddenly became more interested in the merit of heaven and earth. He had already thought about using merit of heaven and earth to become a sage before he entered the demon realm, and when he was still a sage to be. Back then, he already knew that in theory, using the merit of heaven and earth could indeed allow a cultivator to become a sage. However, a sage who became a sage in this way would be shackled by the merit of heaven and earth. The sage who became a sage would not be free at all. He would only be a false sage who could only live and die with the heaven and earth. Luo Fan had already been extremely disdainful of this method of becoming a sage, let alone now that he had almost found the possibility of transcendence and the hope of transcendence. Naturally, he would not care about this method of becoming a sage. Therefore, Luo Fan was more interested in the merit of heaven and earth now. But it was not because he had discovered that the merit of heaven and earth could really make a person a sage and wanted to become a sage with the help of the merit of heaven and earth. Instead, he finally had a chance to verify his original guess. In the past, his various ideas about becoming a sage through merit of heaven and earth were just guesses. He was still not clear about the specific facts, because he had never seen anyone take this path to become a sage. However, the situation was different now. Now, there were sages in this world, and they were sages who had become sages through merit. This was obviously the existence that he had guessed and expected to become a reality. How could he not care about such an excellent opportunity to verify his original guess? However, why is this heaven and earth so low-key even though there are sages in this world? I actually haven't heard of their existence in the Earth universe or the demon realm. Suddenly, Luo Fan fell into doubt again. Previously, when he had opened up a cave abode here to comprehend the merit of heaven and earth, the most direct way was to find the answer to this question. However, now, he had found something even more incredible, but he had not found the direct reason why he had come here. Life was really unpredictable. He slapped his hand, and the merit of heaven and earth instantly left his broken incarnation. It directly condensed into a merit of heaven and earth seal in his hand and lay quietly in his hand. Since the merit of heaven and earth was related to sages, even if he wanted to become a sage through merit of heaven and earth, he could not put it at the back of his mind. He had to hide it first and wait for the time to activate it in the future. Moreover, he had no intention of becoming a sage through merit. At this time, of course, he had to separate the connection between the merit of heaven and earth and himself. The moment he turned the merit of heaven and earth into the merit of heaven and earth seal, the various wonderful feelings that were born naturally because of the merit of heaven and earth naturally disappeared. His mind returned to a normal, perfect, and clear state, as if those various thoughts had not happened before. This is the real me. However, if this little bit of merit of heaven and earth can change my mentality like this, then what kind of changes will the boundless merit of heaven and earth, which can make a cultivator become a sage, have on the mind? How much will the three sages be affected? Now, will they still be able to maintain their original mentality? Luo Fan thought to himself. In his heart, even the idea of becoming a sage through merit of heaven and earth seal as a last resort had completely disappeared. This cave abode was a vast thousand world. It had just been born at this moment, and because of Luo Fan's will, the flow of time in the entire cave abode was no different from the flow of time in the outside world. Therefore, although he had been here for half a year, this vast thousand world was still a barren land without any signs of life. Moreover, because Luo Fan's current worldview had been deeply integrated with everything about him, this made the law of heaven and earth seal a vast thousand world. It was completely in line with the law of heaven and earth seal. It seemed like another law realm. Stay here and see how far you can grow in the future. Looking at such a world, Luo Fan thought on a whim. As he thought about it, he directly lifted his foot and took a light step, directly stepping out of this vast thousand world. Then, he took a few steps and headed towards the center of this world. As a world, even if it was a world shaped like the universe, it must have a center. This center might not be special in itself, but because it had been the center for a long time, naturally, all kinds of inconceivable changes would occur and naturally become miraculous beyond imagination. As for the center of this world, Luo Fan already knew where it was through young Shozi. At this time, there was no problem at all going there. This world was completely different from the demon realm. In the demon realm, because the 54 sages were fighting fiercely with each other, the 4 continents in the center of this world were in chaos. Therefore, ordinary cultivators would not dare to casually step into the 4 continents unless they had the resolve to submit to a sage. This world was different. Although the 3 sages of this world occasionally had conflicts, they mostly supported each other and depended on each other. Even if they depended on each other and clashed with each other, it was just a small scheme. Real wars almost never happened. As a result, this world appeared to be relatively peaceful. As the center of this world, it also showed a completely different characteristic from the 4 continents of the demon realm. Almost every cultivator yearned for the central region. Even if there was fear, it was only because of inferiority. It was not like in the demon realm, where it was because of fear of war. Although the place where Luo Fan entered the central main world was not at the edge of this world, it was still extremely far from the center of this world. Moreover, Luo Fan was not rushing at full speed, so it would still take him a long time to reach the center of this world. However, Luo Fan was not in a hurry. After all, although he had heard a lot of news from young Shozi, he did not really have a direct understanding of this world. He had not really seen this world. Now that he was hurrying along, it gave him a chance to personally experience this world, which had a different kind of charm to it. On this day, Luo Fan left a commercial planet and was about to head toward the planet with the most beautiful scenery in this star field. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked in a certain direction with an inexplicable expression. "You actually found me so quickly. It seems like you guys have been working hard all these years." Just as Luo Fan's expression changed, dozens of level 9 pseudo-sages were carefully digging out a space-time tunnel somewhere in this world. Among these dozens of level 9 pseudo-sages, the ones leading them were the disciples of the Book Supreme and the other Saint Venerables. Since they knew that it was the Book Supreme and the others, their purpose in coming to this world was self-evident. They must be here for Luo Fan. The location of this space-time tunnel was not the location where Luo Fan had opened the space-time tunnel. This was not strange. Back then, Luo Fan had chosen to open the space-time tunnel there by chance. However, it was not the only way to enter this world. In fact, the space-time tunnel that was opened in this world could appear in any location. Chapter 1451. Is this the world? It's extraordinary indeed. There's really a sage. Beside the Book Supreme, a level 9 pseudo-sage said, "Watermark advertisement, test watermark advertisement, test." This level 9 pseudo-sage exuded a trace of eternal and indestructible aura. He was a supreme venerable who had already obtained a holy decree. Moreover, there were still 3 such supreme venerables beside the venerable of the book. Senior Life Supreme, this is the world. Luo Zun is hiding there. Please be careful, the Book Supreme said. As a supreme venerable, although he might not be stronger than the Book Supreme and the others, he could be regarded as an existence of the same generation as the Holy Venerables. Thus, the Book Supreme and the others had to address him as a senior. The Life Supreme smiled and said, "Although this world is of a high level, it's not a problem for us Supreme Venerables. In this world, only those sages can absolutely defeat us. Unless Luo Zun escapes, he won't be able to pose a threat to us. Please be careful, Senior Life Supreme. Although Luo Zun's cultivation realm is not high, his comprehension of cultivation is even comparable to that of a cheating master. If Senior Life Supreme is careless, I'm afraid." The Book Supreme hurriedly said. Not only did the Life Supreme not care about this, but the rest of the level 9 pseudo-sages, including the 3 Supreme Venerables, did not care about what the Book Supreme said. Obviously, to them, the credibility of the Book Supreme's words was a little low. The ideas that they had accumulated over the past billions of years could not convince themselves to believe this. They did not refute it now. They were just giving the Book Supreme and the Holy Venerable some face. They also wanted to use facts to refute this wrong idea when they fought with Luo Fan later. The Book Supreme naturally knew what they were thinking, but he sighed helplessly. At this moment, he suddenly doubted whether it was right to spend a lot of money to invite them to deal with Luo Zun. There should be no problem. Although Luo Zun is powerful, he is only a level 7 pseudo-sage. He's still not strong enough for a supreme venerable. At this time, he could only use this to convince himself. He suppressed the ominous premonition that had appeared in the bottom of his heart. The laws of this world are quite complicated. I'm afraid it will take some time to completely analyze it. Venerable Life seemed to be frowning at this moment. Yes, that's right. I didn't expect this world to need to reanalyze the rules and laws in order to unleash its full potential. It seems we must find a place to settle down as soon as possible. After that, we'll find a chance to subdue Luo Zun, another paragon said. The Supreme Venerable who was addressed, as ancestors said. This was the right thing to do. The Venerable Book wasn't disappointed. He said, I've been here before. However, I have analyzed some of the laws of this world and can set up a formation that fuses with this world. That way, I can isolate all auras and not be detected by anyone. As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped the air. Countless lines appeared in his hand and swam in all directions. The way these lines moved was extremely mysterious and profound. It looked as if there were countless divine dragons swimming in the void. In the end, these countless lines formed a huge spherical region in the void, enveloping this part of the universe. The moment this sphere enveloped the entire void, all the auras of these people were isolated inside the sphere. All the living creatures outside the sphere couldn't sense their existence anymore. Even if they came here and removed the area outside the sphere, they would still feel that this area would be empty, without any living creatures or material existence. After doing all this, the Venerable Book heaved a sigh of relief. Luckily, it's done smoothly. You've been scared out of your wits by him. Venerable Life sighed at this moment. The Venerable Book's behavior just now was completely different from the Venerable Book he knew. This cautious and timid look and the way he struggled with so many details were like two different people compared to the imposing and magnificent Venerable Book. This made him secretly disappointed. The Venerable Book smiled bitterly. There were some things that couldn't be believed unless he saw it with his own eyes. Venerable Life, who hadn't seen Luo Zun's power, believed that Luo Zun could launch such a horrifying attack that they couldn't resist even if they joined forces. This was obviously impossible. Therefore, he didn't say much, but just smiled. His behavior made the Venerable Life and the others despise him even more. Of course, although they despised him, they naturally couldn't show it on their faces. Since all the auras have been hidden here, why don't we just open a world here to rest? The Remnant Venerable said at this moment. He couldn't bear to see the others despise his senior brother, whom they respected and loved so much. Venerable Life was about to answer, but his countenance suddenly changed. Almost at the same time, the other three Supreme Venerables also changed their countenances. After all, the Venerable Life and the others weren't as powerful as the three Supreme Venerables. Only after everyone's countenance changed did they realize that something was wrong. So their countenances also changed. Damn it! How dare you be so arrogant? The Venerable Life shouted lightly. His voice was awe-inspiring, and it contained a powerful momentum that could shake any living creature and make them unable to control themselves. At this moment, an axe tore through the air, drawing a mysterious trajectory in the void. In the blink of an eye, the space-time within a radius of hundreds of millions of light years was turned into a gray mess. Everything within this range, including the rules of law, time, space, and all the substances and energy that existed within it, even the formation that the Book Supreme had set up to isolate all auras, collapsed with a loud bang before the axe arrived. It turned into a chaotic state of absolute chaos. Within the radius of hundreds of millions of light years, everything was destroyed in the blink of an eye. Only venerable life and the others were left with some space-time existences that had not been destroyed. Only then did they have a little bit of support for their existence. The venerable life's countenance finally changed at this moment. Could this be Luo Zun's technique? There was a look of disbelief in his eyes. Obviously, he didn't expect Luo Fan's attack to be so explosive and terrifying. In an instant, he raised his hand and pointed, and an ancient tree appeared above his head. This ancient tree was extremely huge and flourishing. After it appeared in the void, its branches and leaves shook slightly, and endless green light gushed out. It directly turned into a ball of light. It completely enveloped the place where they were. The ancient tree contained a hint of eternal, indestructible aura. That was obviously the venerable life's holy decree that he had added to it. This ancient tree was a level 9 pseudo-divine treasure. Now that it had added the holy decree, its power had already increased by hundreds or thousands of times. Not to mention that ordinary level 9 pseudo-divine treasures couldn't hurt it. Even the treasures of powerful venerables could only repel it, but couldn't hurt it. They were shrouded by the light emitted by such a powerful treasure. At this moment, even the book venerable and the others, who clearly knew how powerful Luo Fan was, unexpectedly felt an indescribable sense of security. It was as if, under the protection of this green brilliance, no power could hurt them or affect them. This green light contained boundless vitality and incomparable order. Within its range, time and space were smoothed out, and the rules and laws were reconstructed. However, the rules and laws that were constructed were a little strange and a little chaotic. Generally, it followed the rules and laws of this world, but there were many details that were similar to the demon realm, and some small details that were similar to other strange vast thousand worlds. This kind of rules and laws was what the Book Supreme had analyzed before. The mysteries of the rules and laws of this world could no longer be used, which greatly weakened his strength here. However, in contrast, the venerable life's strength had been greatly improved. After all, the rules and laws that were smoothed out by this green light followed his understanding of the rules and laws to the greatest extent possible. Although they were still in this world and were still under the control of the great Tao of this world, they still generally belonged to the mysteries of the rules and laws of this world. After all, compared to his shallow analysis of the rules and laws of this world before, it was already countless times better. In the past, he could only exert 10 to 20% of his strength, but at this time, in this place, he could exert at least 80% of his strength. This was already far beyond that of an ordinary level 9 fake saint. It was enough to give the venerable life a lot of confidence. At this moment, Luo Fan's axe finally struck the sphere formed by the green light. In an instant, an earth-shattering cracking sound came from it. The axe seemed to contain the power to split the heavens and the earth. The mysteries and mysteries contained in it were all beyond the understanding of an ordinary level 9 fake saint, and even beyond the scope of the understanding of the most powerful venerables. Although the power of the axe itself was not stronger than the power contained in the green light, the mysteries contained in it instantly assimilated the green light and changed the target of the green light. On the contrary, the power of the axe that turned the green light into the axe was directly guided by the axe, wrapped up, and bombarded on the green light. The green light was directly split open, and the green light sphere directly collapsed. The venerable life's expression changed greatly at this moment. Not only him, but the expressions of the Book Supreme and the others also changed drastically. How could this be? How could the power of the source tree be taken away by others? The venerable life roared. At this moment, the axe had already turned almost all the green light into its own power. The green axe shadow crossed the void and arrived in front of everyone. The axe itself already contained the mysteries of the simple and perfect world that Luo Fan had created in the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. It was not an exaggeration to say that its power could split the heavens and earth. Coupled with the power of the green light, even Luo Fan himself did not know to what extent its power had increased. In an instant, the place where everyone was standing, and even the space-time passage not far behind them, collapsed in an instant. It completely turned into a large area of chaos, and the Book Supreme, the Venerable Life, and the others were instantly engulfed in that chaos. For a moment, they felt that the distance between them and the others had suddenly become extremely far, and they felt that they had become a person facing that terrifying axe alone. Damn it! The Venerable Life roared. He was so angry not only because the current situation was bad, but also because his face had been damaged. It should be known that he was full of confidence just now, and even looked down on Luo Fan. But now, at this moment, Luo Fan's means had made him look bad. It was really a slap to his face. This was simply a humiliation to him. How could he not be angry? While he was roaring angrily, the green light on the ancient tree above his head flashed again. However, this time, the green light did not form defense. Instead, it turned into a terrifying thunderbolt. Amidst the chaos, it condensed into an equally huge axe. Suddenly, it slashed down at the axe that was breaking through the air. This axe that was condensed from thunderbolts was extremely condensed. It even contained the holy decree that the Venerable Life had obtained, causing the axe to look like a genuine supreme magic treasure that had been passed down from ancient times. Around the axe, countless tiny worlds were opened up from the gray chaos, turning into countless tiny specks of light that twined around the axe. After these forces appeared, they began to frantically absorb the surrounding chaos, causing it to quickly calm down. However, after it calmed down, what appeared was not the original normal void of the universe, but a void, a layer of laws without laws, time, space, matter, and energy. It was an absolute void. This was the void layer of this world, which was also where the mysterious upper layer was. The time, space, matter, energy, and even the layer of laws had all been absorbed by the countless worlds that had just been opened up around the axe. Everything had already disappeared. Under such a change, the people who were originally separated by the gray chaos saw each other again. The people present were at least level 9 pseudo-saints. It was extremely easy for them to form their own bodies and form their own space-time. Even if it was an absolute void, even if there was no space or time, it did not affect them at all. It would not become an obstacle for them. However, at this time, everyone did not pay attention to each other. At this time, they all looked at the two axes that were rapidly approaching. Among them, the one with the most complicated expression was the level 9 pseudo-saint under the Holy Venerate, whose magic treasure had been taken away by Luo Fan. Although the axe in his hand was a powerful level 9 pseudo-saint treasure that was enough for him to suppress most level 9 pseudo-saint in the world, its power did not exceed the scope of a level 9 pseudo-saint treasure. Not to mention the treasure of a supreme venerable, it was probably on par with the level 9 pseudo-saint treasures of his senior and junior brothers. However, at this moment, even though it was the same magic treasure, he could still clearly sense that his mark was still in the magic treasure. However, the power of this magic treasure was more than 10,000 times stronger than when it was in his hands. In comparison, this magic treasure was only a child's toy in his hands, but in the hands of the Holy Venerate, it was a sharp weapon that could wipe out a country. This huge difference really made him feel ashamed and excited at the same time. The Holy Venerate's magic treasure had a name, the Genesis Tree. Not only did it contain endless vitality, but could also use vitality to transform into all thunderbolts in the universe. At this moment, the thunderbolt that it had transformed into was obtained by the Holy Venerate after countless billions of years of deduction. It was a kind of thunderbolt that almost surpassed all thunderbolts that he knew. When it turned into a substance, it had the strongest hardness. When it turned into a sharp blade, it had the strongest sharpness that could split everything. At this moment, the thunderbolt collided with the axe. In terms of hardness and sharpness, the two were actually on par. The axe was actually not immediately shattered by the level 9 pseudo-saint treasure that had a physical body. An extremely terrifying power erupted from the point of contact between the two. At this moment, there was no sound at all. In the blink of an eye, the absolute chaos within a radius of hundreds of millions of light years was completely wiped out. This time, it did not completely return to its normal state. Instead, just like when the Thunderbolt axe gave birth to countless worlds, it instantly wiped out all the rules and laws. All time, space, matter, energy, and everything else was completely wiped out. It caused everything within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles to turn into nothingness. Absolute nothingness. The axe that Luo Fan unleashed was not fundamentally based on the power of this level 9 pseudo-saint treasure. In fact, this treasure itself was just a carrier that carried his understanding of the creation of heaven and earth, and his axe that was enough to split heaven and earth. The Thunderbolt axe had the strength to resist the axe, but it was not the end of the world for Luo Fan. The axe only shook slightly, and the power produced by the collision with the axe was instantly dispersed by him and directly condensed. It turned into the power of the axe itself. With a slight shake, it had already bypassed the Thunderbolt axe, as if the Thunderbolt axe was an illusory object. With an even faster speed, it fiercely chopped towards the Holy Venerate and the others. In the process, the Holy Decree of the Holy Venerate. It did not have any effect at all. It did not have any effect on the axe at all. At this moment, the eyes of the Holy Venerate were filled with disbelief. He only muttered, "How is this possible?" Everything that happened in front of him. It had completely subverted his way of thinking. As an ultimate venerable, a great existence who had not succeeded in breaking through to the sage realm but had not died, he had not felt failure for many years. However, at this moment, not only did he fail, but he also had no ability to resist. Like a child in front of an adult, he had failed without any ability to resist at all. Even his strongest technique, his greatest reliance, was as fragile as a piece of paper. This kind of feeling, to him, was unbearable, but it went without saying how hard it was to bear. Damn it! It was not the Holy Venerate who spoke at this moment. Instead, it was the other 3 ultimate Venerates. At this moment, they did not have any thoughts of belittling the Holy Venerate, nor could they look down on Luo Fan, who had forced them into such a state. At this moment, there was only one thought in their minds, and that was to survive. Before the terrifying axe descended on their bodies and completely erased them, they had to use enough methods and strength to block this axe. As ultimate Venerates, the 3 of them did not obtain the Holy Decree through their own efforts to break through to the Sage Realm. 2 of them obtained the Holy Decree through various means, which was why they became ultimate Venerates. The different means of becoming ultimate Venerates caused the 3 of them to have a different degree of control over the Holy Decree. This difference caused the 3 of them to attack at different times. The ultimate Venerable who had obtained the Holy Decree through his own power was the first to display his means. As the light shone, a bronze box appeared above his head. The box emitted a trace of eternal and indestructible aura. It was obvious that it had already been imbued with the Holy Decree. After the box appeared, it suddenly opened and spat out a deep black light. It suddenly wrapped around the axe and pulled it deeper into the box. Unknowingly, the direction of the axe's advance was reversed. Seeing this change, everyone's confidence was greatly boosted. Although the change in the direction of the axe was very small, it was a change after all. As long as there was a change, there was hope. This meant that they were not completely defenseless against the axe. Under the stimulation of this confidence, the remaining 2 ultimate Venerates used the Holy Decree more smoothly. Almost at the same time, a magic treasure that was imbued with the Holy Decree appeared above their heads. One of the magic treasures looked like a zither, while the other looked like a long rod. After the 2 magic treasures appeared, they each emitted an intense light. The Holy Decree was condensed in the light, and it directly struck the axe. No, this axe will absorb the power of the attack. At this moment, the holy venerable suddenly returned to his senses and roared. This roar caused the expressions of the two ultimate venerates to change drastically. They tried their best to distort the attack that they had just launched. Unfortunately, it was too late.